I decided to go early. So I said, why not? Everybody's waiting here. Necro Kitty basically is, panicking. She wants to chat with someone. So I said, what the hell not? I'll go early. So here I am. G'day, guys. Jared is expected within the next hour. So I'll go early. Well, oops. Left that on. Better plug this in because otherwise I'm going to get feedback. Yes, the early bird, Zach. That is definitely it. Oops. I just cycle through these. Oops, it's dropping out of my ear. Well, isn't that correctly holding it? 1, 2, 3, 4. After that, the tears. I had to come on early. Yes. Everybody should thank Necro Kitty. Salt and ice. What a combo. Doesn't sound like a bad way to stop a fast with a bit of liver. I actually really like thin strips of liver. It's a bit of a hassle. I've got one of those really nice carving knives, and I just really carve really thin strips. You can actually just cook them lightly on a barbecue, and they become like a bit like dried out meat sort of thing. Yeah, they can be quite good in that regard. Oops. Oops. Good morning as well, Cheryl. Okay, so I want the others. Yeah, it's a bit like that at the moment. Yes, do please hit the like button. Yeah, for some damn reason, at the moment, I don't know why, but it's sort of, is it going to happen? Yep, it just came through. Okay. Just keeps on popping out. I don't know bloody for what reason. Have I got the right one? That is annoying. Liver juice. Interesting. Yeah, I will be. At some point I will be doing on the redox potential and mitochondria and stuff like that. Part of that long sort of thing that I want to do, a couple of things. So the funny thing is, when I actually look at them, even the recent one that I did on the seafood one, the previous one after that, when I look at the live streams, they get, live streams get like double, and the amount of effort you have to put in a live stream isn't that much. I just turn up, I talk, and then basically it's all done and dusted. I go and relax. But actually putting together. This is why Bart doesn't do any of these things. He basically just does premieres where he just quickly comments. It's like a live stream without questioning, and then bang out. And those sort of things seem to basically get more clickbait, where when you're actually trying to put things together with slides and diagrams and stuff like that, it's very time consuming. And then it's quite disheartening when you don't get a lot of people actually checking the stuff out and liking it either. I mean, what was the recent one? Let me just bring it up. Which give you an example of what I mean, Zach. Which was the Mercury one. Seafood and Mercury. And basically it only got 17 likes. That's it. 17 likes, no more. 115 views for the mercury, selenium content in seafood. And some people, made some very nice comments about how it was very comprehensive. They'd never seen something as comprehensive and as nuanced, but still very few views. And it's and that can be disheartening because you go, well, fuck, I put so many hours trying to put it together, then actually having to cut and slice to be able to fit the other supplementary stuff in and sort of then redo which takes 2 hours to reprocess it. So it all sort of syncs properly. It's all in the same frame rate and everything else. So it doesn't sort of seem strange, and so it can be in that regard a bit disheartening. What you end up with in terms of viewership for those sort of things. It's not that I don't want to do them, but they are time consuming, and they're not very popular for whatever reason. People sort of want to see you in the flesh, answering questions and stuff like that, and in that regard. Bart's in the house. G'day, mate. Yeah, look, and that's the thing. Live streams tend, because you're interacting with people, and they tend to be more popular in that regard. So what is Augusto saying? Augusto, oh, Harry, I've just uploaded an old video of mine eating bovine brains, liver, and one. Look, people enjoy those, sort of the live streams and what somebody eats in a day sort of things, some of the stuff that Bart does with his premiere type things, they seem to have more clickbaitable stuff, where when you're trying to do some of this information sort of stuff, I get a third of the actual viewership and very few likes for the effort that I have to put in to make these little videos. I mean, I remember even Frankie used to bitch and complain about them until I started doing them myself and actually noticing not many people view them. You get a very small viewership compared to live streams or premieres or things like that. And especially with the amount of effort and time and hours you have to do to actually put them together, all the details, all the slides, create all that, and then basically, do all the post-production of, cutting things and then re-merging them together and, and trying to make sure that they're all in sort of the same sync in terms of frame rate and everything else. You sort of go, oh, God, That's why I do a lot of live streams, because I get more people viewing them compared to, some of the other stuff. So, yeah, look, Necro Kitty sort of said to me, we have to wait for 28 minutes and all that. And so I sort of came back from grabbing a glass of water and I said, "Oh, bugger it, I'll start a bit earlier," so get the whole thing going. Yep, yeah, that's right. There's a lot of because I mean I sort of answer a lot of these questions anyway in quite some depth when it comes to and nuance a lot of the stuff. So. Yeah, I did. I actually overslept from last night because that was a late sort of sort of finished after 12 my time, and then sort of went, and then by the time I got to bed, it was a bit after 1 because I was piss farting around, doing things, and then I'd be going, what am I doing? This is late. So then I went to bed, and that's why I got up. I overslept today. It does happen. Five days, no more than 20 grams of carbs. That's good. That's good. It's sometimes hard for people to sort of, in that regard, because for the simple reason, even my older sister, it took me. She's still overweight. My younger sister's a complete opposite. And she basically does low carb and keto and sort of all sorts of things. But my older sister's, still carb eater and all that. She's overweight and all that. And she actually had 170 over 110, like blood pressure. And she was really worried and all that. And I said, don't get them to put you on medication. And I actually convinced her. It was a hard slog and a lot of sort of, me cajoling her and all that. And she did low carb for about a week, a bit over a week, and her blood pressure just dramatically dropped from 170 right down to 115 or something like that, over 70 something. So into the normal range, even though she's overweight, so just by basically getting rid of, she lost a few kilos just from that water retention, so sort of the insulin dropping and reducing that water retention just dropped her whole blood pressure. I think insulin plays a big role via the kidneys in terms of blood pressure. And so, that's the key driver. I mean, there are other, things like, the narrowing of your arteries for some people, a whole lot of these sort of things. If you've basically got in your red blood cells too many phytosterols, they will stiffen those, and that means the pressure for them to get into those, into the more narrower blood vessels can actually increase, because you end up with more platelet aggregation because of this stiffness. So it's a myriad of complex issues, but the number one for me is basically insulin. And then all the others are sort of secondary to different degrees, and sometimes sort of complementary with others that actually make things worse. Yep. Thought police. Yes. Yeah. I've noticed a lot of, like Barters, I've noticed a lot of my stuff recently has improved since I've gone in and edited a lot of the Colvic stuff out, and a lot of the other stuff like in the tags and all that. Things have slightly improved. So there's probably a bit of truth in that, and a lot of other people are saying the same thing. They've noticed a lot of things out there as well. And they do have a policy. YouTube have actually stated that they have a policy that they will basically supposedly cleanse YouTube of all these sort of fake sort of stuff and all that. Basically what they mean is any real opposition to the sort of the standard paradigm is going to be suppressed to some extent. And so it's not looking good for free speech on YouTube in the down the track. So it's a reality that we're going to be worried about, and it's going to create a lot of problems for our community, unfortunately. Yeah, look, it is. It is for a lot of people, Luke. It's disheartening that you've got algorithms working against you from YouTube, and basically a lot of people that are putting good stuff out there are sort of going, why am I putting all this effort when YouTube is throttling me back? It's just really unfair, and it's really becoming a veg-tard YouTube, pretty much promoting the standard line, and anybody that falls within that standard line seems to be getting the benefit. I mean, the whole idea was called YouTube for a reason. It wasn't, consensus tube or anything else. It was YouTube. That means you, the person, it's your tube to basically put out your message. So yeah, they've really moved away from their early days and the philosophy that they had, and have become, very partisan on a lot of issues, and are taking a stance against free speech on YouTube. YouTube is no longer an environment for free speech, or people being able to present their own opinion on there. So it's not it's our tube, and it's their tube really. And they are really throttling back a lot of people, unfortunately. Yeah, if people knew your live stream existed, it would. Yeah, look, I know. I know. Look, like Bart's and many other people's live streams, if they knew about these things, and all they would have to be exposed to a couple of our vids, look at the content of information, look at the answers we're giving, and look at sort of how the quality of the information that's coming out, and they would basically gravitate to. But when you click on YouTube, and the first whole lot of stuff is just nonsense and crap, and basically advertising dollars are going all to that sort of stuff, and they're promoting that and backing it up. It's sort of it's an uphill battle for the rest of us. I mean, the only way, or as I've said to people, you guys need to go out there and actually share our content around the place, Twitter, Facebook, in all sorts of areas. Post links in other against other videos where you find content which is you disagree with, and it's crap, and you can put a link, one of mine or Bart's, or people from within the community, and say, well, here's a different opinion. Why don't you check this out? Because they can't stop that, and you guys can go around and actually spread the message. Because at the end of the day, it's you guys that are basically going to either make or break the sort of our community. It's basically people that are part of the meat militia, people that are part of the community, that go out there and actually do the work to basically make us work better known amongst it, because YouTube isn't going to do it for us. They are not going to basically be doing anything like that for us. So yeah, I'll just put that for a sec. Yep. Yeah, pretty much. Yes. They should call it the sugar tube, because basically they promote a diet that basically, or the sort of diets that basically harm people, because they don't really care. For them, it's it's all about the dosh, and suppressing messages that are not in their best interest. And that's why, as I said, it's not YouTube anymore; it's their tube. And that's the biggest problem with it. Whether something new turns up in the future that we could sort of gravitate towards, or a lot of other people who believe. I think a lot of people, if they had an opportunity to basically, be able to see different content and all that, they would. But when you have algorithms that are restricting things, it's hard to sort of fight that. And it's really you guys that have to go out there and start pinning our sort of content around the place so it gets known. And so as people gravitate towards our content and start looking at it, even though the algorithms are working against us to some extent, if you grow substantially, they can't ignore you, because there's the potential, the revenue side. So you got the struggle between their beliefs and the revenue side, and I can tell you dollars always wins. So in that regard, there is a bit of hope. Small, but there is a bit of hope in that regard. So we sort of need to sort of focus on those sort of things. Look, I'm not, Necro Kitty. I'm not really into sort of posting what I eat in a day and stuff like that. I tell people what I eat. People know I eat beef, I eat pork, I eat ruminant animals, I eat dairy, I eat seafood, and all that sort of stuff. I eat a varied style, but it's not, what I'm really interested in doing. I mean, there are other sites that specialize in that sort of stuff. But you know, it's not something that I do, and um, personally, in that regard. And I think there's also the other side that where people need to also consider their heritage and say, where do I come from? What sort of potentially snips in terms of genetics that I may have. I've mentioned these before with you guys about, you know, all the sort of the methylation type genes, the choline, genes, the beta carotene stuff in the British Isles in particular, and some of the Scandinavian countries. So these sort of things, which means that you need to gravitate to specific foods that will give you that nutrition, and that's really So what I eat is not going to be necessarily the best thing for most optimal for what you should eat. you know. So I've got really good conversion of LA and ALA. So pork is going to be less of an issue for me in terms of conversion or the sort of the omega-3, omega-6 ratios. But somebody from Northern Europe is going to be more of an issue. So that's why I don't encourage people to basically, consume more pork. I say if your ancestors consumed more other types of ruminants, that's what you should gravitate towards. You shouldn't be eating what I'm eating, because I've also don't have a salicylate problem. So I could have coconut oil if I wanted to, or milk or whatever. Not that I do. I used to, but not anymore. But I don't have a salicylate issue. Most Northern Europeans do. So I don't like, this sort of blanket sort of advice. I think it's not the right way to go. I think people need to basically look at their own history, look at what people ate in the past. It's the sort of things that I looked at my own ancestry, what it ate in the past, and I've done some of the isotope analysis on the ancient Greeks and focused on what did they eat. And I know they consumed a lot of pork and a lot of, not beef in some areas of Greece, but primarily it was, lamb and goat. So it was those and a bit of coastal fish. So those are the sort of things that I sort of gravitate towards. Crustaceans, coastal sort of seafood, more than anything else. So I used to eat flake and sharks and stuff like that, but I don't anymore. And so I've moved away from the sort of things that maybe could be potentially deleterious in that sort of thing. So these we need to always nuance things and not sort of not one thing will fit every single person. There are different genetics from region to region, and so there are differences. Han Chinese, more capacity to endogenously produce choline. Most Europeans, Central Asians don't have that capacity. So there's going to be differences there. So we need to get it from the diet where they less require to get it from the diet. So it's these sort of differences that, regional ones that are very important. So what's Bart saying? Harry, can you describe how the mantis has no canines and it's therefore a herbivore? Mate, that's a trick question. Hey, I'll take that under advisement, and that's basically, you'll have to apply for a special consultation for that. Look, the thing is, in nature, there's a whole lot of animals that are very different. I mean, scavengers and carnivorous scavengers are hawks. They have no canines. They fly around and all that. They scavenge meat all over the place. So do the what are they called, the American bald eagle. So you've got all these different varied animals that have basically, it's the end of the day, it's what these animals have actually eaten for a long time and have actually adjusted. You don't need canines. You don't need to basically run after an animal. We have different hunting techniques. And basically, we just basically can sweat. Midday persistent hunters works very well for us. So we don't need to basically, jump on like a lion on an animal. So there's all these things. Problem is that even herbivores have different teeth structures. You will find different herbivores that actually have different teeth structures. They're not all the same. Some actually will grind the food. Some will just rip it and ingest it, and basically they have more capacity within their stomach to ferment it. There are so many variations in nature. You can find any sort of example you like. At the end of the day, you sort of have to look back, what me and Bart have been saying for a long time, the N15 isotope analysis, to really work out what did our ancestors for the majority of time consume. And that's really important. And the only shift that actually happened, you can look at basically as the hominins sort of evolved, and those sort of shifts happened on the ApoE sort of, and that's basically related back to HDL. And so that sort of, from a 4-4, like, these so-called hybrid responders that I've spoken about before, the difference between those people as we shifted, and our food supply started diminishing over time, there were small adjustments to be able to deal with some plants as survival foods. And that's why these things came much later, not earlier, these adjustments. Because if they were in our evolutionary history earlier that we were consuming these type of plant foods, these genetic changes would have happened much earlier. They didn't. They happened 200,000 years ago and then 80,000 years ago, pre-agriculture. And that's small amounts coming into the diet, not large amounts like today. So the body evolves and regionally evolves, and you'll have different sort of expressions of ApoE from one region to another around the world for those topographical and regional reasons. It's the same thing with all the other genetics that I've spoken about, the choline, the NTHFRs, all the methylation type genes. Same reason. It's basically, you can go back and check all that. I'm not going to discuss it today in my other previous vids, but yes, it's a trick question from Bart, in that regard. But he knows very well that there are so many variations in nature. There's fish in the sea that basically just gulp basically their prey and don't chew, don't do anything. They just gulp it and digest it in their stomachs. So there are so many variations in nature. We have to observe and look at the evidence, and the archaeological evidence shows quite clearly what we ate and and all the spearheads, what we hunted. If there were no spearheads and there were no sort of bone, bones that actually showed cuts in them from stone tools, and there was none of this that existed, and there was no, then we could say, based on the total of the evidence, that, we don't know. But we do. There's the N15 that's actually solidified in the bones. And then there's all the other stuff that basically is in the archaeological sort of evidence that exists out there that basically makes it quite clear. So whether one herbivore has something or doesn't have something, or whether one carnivore has something or doesn't have something, these are evolutionary things, and that animals have got, that have had from a previous period. There hasn't been a genetic pressure for those things to change because they were able to comfortably adapt, whether it was from cooking or whether it was basically from developing tools that they could actually shear things off. You can actually see it even in the chimps. They actually break things. They've got a lot of upper body, strength, far more than us in proportion, bigger muscles up rather than below, where we have, like persistent hunters, more muscle at the bottom in our legs. And that's where our glycogen, and usually also where our issues mostly arrive, especially with diabetes and shit like that, is because we've switched in that regard. But when it comes to basically the new type of nutrition an animal consumes and the way it consumes it, there are so many variations in nature in terms of anatomy and stuff like that, that you don't look at that. You actually look at the gut. You actually look at the stomach gut and all that. That's where you have to look, and that really tells you a different story. When you've got a pH of 1.5, that's pretty low. That's a scavenger carnivore. You know, you know, every single scavenger carnivore, like all the birds, like that basically undertake the same sort of scavenging, have a 1.5. So it's not accidental that all scavengers in nature tend to have a very low pH. So we started off as scavengers and then progressed to become midday persistent hunters and started sweating so we could do it. So we lost our hair and started sweating. So all these adaptations came together. So the things that needed to happen happened, and the things that didn't need to happen remained as they were. So, nature doesn't just change things, capriciously, and it takes a lot of time over evolutionary history for things to change, and there has to be pressure for it. If there's no pressure, and we've developed some sort of hack or some sort of method of basically using stone tools to cut meat to make it more easier to digest and sort of chew on, we develop, there's no pressure. There's no basically evolutionary pressure to make changes to our teeth. So it's these sort of things, and species that basically don't have this dexterity like we have, you do notice these changes. There are basically on the Galapagos Islands, there are certain birds that, because they're basically eating larger, basically the nuts sizes have changed over time, and the supply of certain nuts which were smaller, so their beak became bigger to be able to handle, to be able to crush the bigger nuts. So there was an evolutionary pressure to basically either you built a bigger beak, or you basically ceased to exist, and that's how evolution works. So things that happen only happen because of evolutionary pressures. If they don't happen, there's no necessity for it to happen. So it's a long answer, but yeah, anyway, you know me. Bored if me to eat eggs all day. Look, different people. Look, some people. It's really strange, Michelle. Some people don't get bored. They will eat steak every single day, not get bored, or eat eggs every day. I remember the guy that used to eat 25 eggs a day. Never bored at all. I couldn't do it. I love variety. I need to switch. I have fish one day, I'm having this another day, continuously variety. It would drive me up the wall having to eat steak every day or eggs every day. So it really varies on people's, and there's probably some psychology there as well. Culturally, it probably derives from your cultural background as well, or your family background. The certain things. I mean, we don't realize all these slight patterns of behavior we pick up at a very early age, those first 7 years of our life. And, sometimes I look at Dad and I look at some things that I've done that I'm doing recently, and then I look at Dad and I go, fuck, then you really realize how you pick up these little behaviors that, and sometimes you go, oh shit, why am I doing that? And so my younger sister has one of my father's, because she was very close to my father, and she has one of those behavior issues as well, where Dad usually sort of, I've very rarely do it, but he usually brings his tongue out and he does this kind of thing with his tongue. And my younger sister, when she's stressed, she does exactly the same thing. It's like looking at Dad in a female form, So there is a lot of hardwired stuff that happens there as well, so yeah, I think what makes one person what is boring to one person in sort of behavior or food or whatever can be completely different for another person. So it's, yeah. Let's move on. Ah, a bit like my brother-in-law, my younger sister's husband. Yes, yes. Yeah, hopefully he realizes that he has to do something about it. So yes, and sort out things in his diet and his lifestyle. So Zach likes the little interesting little bits and pieces which I offer. Yeah, look, that's the thing that I like to sort of get into, just talking about little things, and the kind of scene one that was last night, was it, or the last time that I chatted about? It's it gives me an opportunity to sort of like feedback with people, and sometimes people will ask me something, and I'll go, look, I'll look into it, and I'll come back, and stuff like that. Now, Zach, you did ask me, and now that you did remind me. Let me just bring it up. Remember, you asked me about getting sort of light bulbs and stuff like that, because my friend couldn't actually source them because now China's cut off and nobody can fly anywhere, which is a bloody hassle. But you're interested, and let me just find those links. I'll put them in a draft email just so I can actually bring them up. Here it is. Okay. Bring that up first, and then okay. Let me just bring that on the screen. I'll just get rid of that. Okay, so there's this company here, and this is an Aussie company. So this is an Aussie company that basically has different blue blocking sort of technology and stuff like that, and they have different products, stuff like that. They've got the glasses, they've got the bulbs, they've even got sleep accessories. They sort of cover a range, red light type therapy stuff. So they have a lot of varying different products that they actually sell in that regard. So let's just here it is. So they've got the red light one. So these are the red light ones that basically, so twilight red light bedtime bulb, they're $30 each. Yes, they are a bit pricey in that regard. And you can actually see that pretty much, remember last time when I actually talked about, up to about 570 nanometers. So that they're basically, that's the sort of frequency where you get the, the last part of the yellow of the green spectrum. So basically here is mostly the orange and red part of the spectrum, which you usually get as, in that sort of twilight period as the sun as the sun goes down and you shift to the near infrared. And so this is ideal type, lighting for the home in terms of, and you can get it in two forms. There's bayonet or screw type. So there's both these. And so if you go to the site called blockbluelight.com.au, they basically have a whole lot of different types that you can actually, purchase in that regard. So they have a number of different types. And that's the other one, which is the Sweet Dreams Sleep Light, no blue light type method. So you've got the reddish type. So, and then you've got this sort of, and it's basically looking at the same sort of spectrum. This has just a tiny bit more of the green spectrum, because it actually does pop. You see, the other one further was better for like in the bedroom, where this one is, like in the evenings, early evenings or whatever, you end up with this sort of lighting in the home. So it's sort of like a, it's not as sort of as dark as the other one. The red type is a bit on the darker side, the way it actually looks. So it's probably, the other ones are more appropriate probably for bedroom, where this one is more appropriate for, your living rooms, your kitchens and places like that, that are not going to be made as dark in that regard. So, and even at these sort of at these sort of frequencies, you're not getting any of the blue light, and you're only getting a bit of the actual green spectrum. And so that doesn't really have a severe inhibition on melatonin sort of production. So that's the Aussie site. Yes, they are a bit pricey in that regard, especially if you want to change quite a lot of light bulbs. You may basically decide to say, okay, I need one for the kitchen, one for the living room, one for the dining room, and one for my bedroom. So 4. And so, that's $160, plus, whatever else. So it is expensive. That's why I was trying to get my mate that goes to Jake that goes to basically China and all that, to see if you could get source something from there cheaper, so we could actually sell, get a Chinese company to produce some, or get them directly from, because he goes up into Inner Mongolia and the things are very cheap up there, I can tell you. So this is another company. This is sort of an American company. They have a much more diverse product range, and they are cheaper in many regards. A lot of their products, I mean, check this one out, this is reading sort of thing. This is a sleep light bulb. That's fairly cheap, in that regard. But it is lower voltage as well. So you have to really do a bit of a comparison. See, once you get into these higher sort of things that cover more space, that have got a higher sort of voltage, then you basically end up, the higher. But even this one here is 13 watts. It's not too bad. Well, that's 9 watts. So, this may be a better option. It's really just checking these sites out and seeing what's available. This is another basically company as well. Healthlighting.com, it's called. And they've got the sort of health with an E after it, and then lighting. So that's another thing that people can look at, and they have another number of products in here, sort of in terms of, here's a baby light type thing, which is fairly competitively priced in that regard. And then there's this company here also, and that's not a bad price compared to the others. So this is an American company as well, Hearth Home, hearthyourhome.com. I'll put links, I'll pin the links at the end of this so people can go and look at this sort of stuff. But hopefully when we're able to get out of the country and able to move around again, it's probably going to be next year, there's going to be a possibility there to basically try and actually source from China, cheaper options for this sort of technology. This is Amazon. So if you go to this store as well, the Amazon, they've got links, there. So here it's $16. Here it's still $19 on the Amazon site. So if you go directly to the company, it's going to be cheaper, so in that regard. Yeah. So I know Zach's been asking me quite a few times, about this sort of technology. I've got the information. I've got it off from my work computer. I literally put all the links that I'd actually saved into this, basically an email draft page, so I could have them all, so I could actually basically, and luckily Zach asked me a question that literally made me remember. So basically, I'll just stop that. Sulfur is good. So MSM is a sulfur, so, it's, I've heard some people recently talking about DHEA. So if you're eating a lot of animal foods and you're getting more cholesterol, your body, and if you basically fast and you basically exercise and stuff like that, these things go up. You can actually supplement from DHEA, but, don't. You're creating balances and stuff like that. I know a lot of people are pushing supplements out there, but don't. But the other thing is, where DHEA also requires sulfur. A lot of these sort of things, when you look at them, a lot of them require sulfur. And our soils are sulfur depleted. Our bodies tend to be sulfur depleted, and then basically people tell us to basically consume massive quantities of vitamin C. And that was, the oxalate that will be generated, oxalate will also deplete sulfur. So, we're not doing ourselves much of a service. And as I said, with that Chinese study about people taking high doses of vitamin C and, really helping them, it's, if you're in that sort of state, it's like vitamin D. Your vitamin D requirements go up when you're ill. Your vitamin C requirements go up. All your antioxidants, these sort of things go up. So, as I said, keep them in your toolkit. And if you need to use them at that moment when you are sick and you require them, that's when you start throwing that in. That's when you start throwing the zinc supplement, the additional, chewable stuff. Because I hear some people say, "Oh, I'm doing that," and I'm going, "Well, are you sick?" You really need to be able to throw these things at a time when you are sick and when the body's going to use them. Otherwise, you can potentially over time create imbalances. And I constantly see people having electrolyte imbalances and all sorts of mineral imbalances in there, and certain symptoms. When they mention them, I go, "Are you doing this?" And they usually say yes. And, it's a bit of a giveaway in that regard. He's depressed. Go and have some pizza and some Coronas. That should fix your depression. Yeah, look, yeah, we live in a world where, unfortunately, we're being throttled at the throat. Unlikely the way YouTube's actually dealing with us. I think we're all going to be stuck to where we are for a long time. You know, it's very unfair. It's bloody unfair. Yes, yes. Thanks, Bart. But I somehow think that our community is really being hammered and throttled at the moment. And the best thing we can all do is go around and link stuff. I go around and link a whole lot of stuff of Bart's all over the place, to help him out. And you guys can basically do that for Bart. You can do it for me. You can do it for others to link things around, I even sometimes, if there are things that some people that are friends of mine on Facebook that are going to enjoy, Sean Baker's or, Paul Saladino's or whoever's, I will link those, so I have my sort of Facebook has a very diverse type of linkages, not only of my content, but content of a whole lot of other people, sometimes even more than mine. I don't actually, link everything of mine, where I've linked a lot of things of other people, because at the end of the day, we need to all be sort of doing this to help the community. Because it's not going to we're not going to basically maintain sufficient, get our message across, because these people are trying to suppress free speech, and that's true. They're trying to control the narrative. They're trying to control, what gets out there and push and peddle their misanthropic sort of information, which serves corporate greed. At the end of the day, I don't think these people are sort of thinking, oh, we want to deliberately make everybody vegan. Nah. There's good money in it. That's where the motivation is coming from. There's, really good money in it. So Frank just became a conspiratist and gained about 40 Ks. Yeah, look, exactly. Yeah, I'm not willing to do that, because I'm not willing to promote and push pseudoscience in order to get more subs. As I said, I'd rather lose half my subs than become, a supporter of pseudoscience. Then why am I wasting my time? I could be sitting back enjoying the company of my friends, or doing other things, that make me happy. I don't need to come on and do anything. It's because I've suffered with cardiovascular disease. I've basically found a way to reverse a lot of the damage that I did, and basically start getting healthier again. And I'm out there, freely giving, pushing that message and trying to help people. Frank's sort of just gone off the rails. I've unsubscribed from Frank, I can tell you. I've just recently done that. I actually sent him a message and told him that I was, that he's gone off, that he's lost the plot. He hasn't replied back. He's just ignored me as usual. But I said to him, you've lost the plot, mate, on all this sort of crap and all that, the nonsense that he's sort of peddling and pushing and all that. And so, because he doesn't help the community. Because most people, I come across now people on the interwebs where I'm actually putting comments, and I actually say certain things. They go, "Oh, you're a carnivore. You're one of those nut cases." They don't even know me. And I go, check my content out. But the problem is, because the Franks of the world and, are getting the traction out there, people think that we're all like Zverich and Frank. We're not, and most of the crack pottery usually comes from, the reality is from ex-vegans. You don't really get people that come from a sad diet, or the paleo community, or the keto community, or the low carb community, like I have, like Bart has, and all that, are people that basically gravitate towards the science, want to know where the science went wrong, where the science has sort of things that it can teach us, and basically try to inform people, in a sensible way. That's what we're, to try and improve people's health with things that work, not things that, crackpot things and ideas. Where a lot of these other people who have come from, haven't come from that tradition, tend to gravitate towards this sort of stuff, because I don't know. It's maybe they became vegans in the first place because they thought that the world was against them, and so it was a sort of a rebellious thing. And so those sort of people that have that tendency, have a tendency also to, you know, it's not as if there aren't conspiracies that happen. It's not as if there aren't dark forces and nasty people in this world and exploitative people. There are. But, you would think that basically the world is basically going to hell in a handbasket and that we've got all these monsters about to devour us. It's not the case. If you go back just 100 years, we were butchering ourselves like there was no tomorrow. Millions and millions were dying from communicable diseases, from warfare, pestilence, and all that. We live in one of the most stable, safest, and secure times in our history. Yes, some of the people that run the place are really mismanaging things currently. But generally speaking, we live in one of the most safest and stable times in our history. I sort of fear more that because of these continuous global frictions, that we may be pushing back against that post-World War II era and moving back to an era where, 19th century type world where there were a lot of nation states that were rivals, pulled up the drawbridge, stopped global trade, and started creating alliances and starting to compete and fight between different blocks of countries. I fear we potentially could be going back there and lose this great stability that we've had since the post-war years. So that's where my fear is, and some of these sort of conspiratorial groups that are fomenting this. America for the Americans, Australia for the Australians, New Zealand for New Zealanders, Germany for Germans, Italians for Italy. This sort of stuff doesn't end well. Just look pre-World War II. Everybody for themselves, and basically it really ends nasty for everyone. A lot of bloodshed and all that. So, and the thing is, within both elites and within different social groups and all that, there are globalists and there are globalists. There are differences. There are some globalists that basically, just want globalization to exploit people and for their own ends and control people. And then there are other people that basically see that we can create a community with global rules where we're not butchering each other left, right, and center. So I'm more into the global rules sort of side, where as nation states, we still have our independence, we still run our show within our own countries, and as democracies, where our people have a say on that. But also that there are global agreements where we have a level of stability where we can trade freely with each other, where we're not butchering each other on the high seas. That's the sort of world. And we had that to some extent. Even the major powers like the Soviet Union and the United States and many other major powers had agreements in place to basically throttle that tendency of conflict and all that. When you move away from that and you start, jacking up the tension, it never ends well, guys. It never ends well, and it's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable rush, I can tell you, when you're on that sort of treadmill of conspiracies, of basically, hating someone else, or basically jumping on those sort of bandwagons of, sort of the nationalistic bandwagons and all that. But they never end well, and a lot of people end up dying. So we got a lot of problems on this planet. We've got a lot of things that are basically at our throat. And the problem is, you've got a whole lot of globalists out there that are basically don't give a shit about the world. They just want to exploit the world for their own ends and control the world. But there are also some people like myself who basically see, while I'm a patriot, on the one hand, I realize that the best service that I can do for my own people is basically to have good relationships with other people. So My sort of globalist ideas are basically maintaining good relationships with other nations and having treaties that basically guarantee those relationships. That's much better. Having global treaties, not global organizations that sort of impose their will and are controlled by certain elites and stuff like that, but global treaties where nations come together and say, look, we need to do things better. We have to have certain arrangements. I mean, even the G20, it's not perfect, in some regards, but I prefer the G20 than the G7, because the G7 is basically just a small bunch of countries that get their way and push everybody else around, where the G20 at least is more representative of the rest of the world. It should be slightly bigger than that, than the G20, in my personal view, and it should basically encompass all nations where through the assembly, not the Security Council, but through the assembly of the UN, basically discuss and create treaties that everybody agrees with, rather than having the major powers impose their will and saying, we're the richest, we're the strongest. Well, basically what they mean is, they're our elites in the most strongest, powerful nations. We will impose our will. We, the Chinese, we, the Americans, we, the old British Empire in the past, or we, the European Union. That's the sort of stuff I don't like, because that's sort of, it basically just treats every other smaller nation like shit, gets pushed around and all that. And that's these are the things that create tensions and then force people into blocks. I'm with this block, I'm with that block, I'm with the China block, the American block, or that block, or whatever. And, people start becoming nasty to each other. And as I said, look back at history. It never turns out well in the long run. It goes to shit. When people around the world were uniting, if, there was the peace movement. I used to be part of the peace movement back as a youngster. I was actually the state secretary of the Australian Peace Committee in Tasmania, and so I was involved in a lot of these sort of campaigns and had international connections. Used to go to conferences I'd been and had linkages with a whole lot of people around the world that were trying to push things to try and reduce the tension in the world, to try and basically make the world a better place for all of us, because, if things get out of whack or beyond certain control, they end up really bad, and people like Frank, they don't help, all they do is they generate fear, hatred, that's all they do. They just generate all that sort of stuff, and they create disunity in our community and beyond, and basically, let alone putting us in disrepute with the general community, which isn't a good thing. But it doesn't help anyone. It absolutely does not help anyone. So, yeah, thanks, Augusto, for actually asking that question. You probably learnt more about my sort of views about the world. Some people may remain subscribers, some people may go. I don't care, honestly. That's my views. I'd rather have a world where different parts of the population around the world basically work together to maintain stability, rather than, allowing these elites to get away with assassinations and this and that. Because still, the United States undertakes assassinations. The Chinese do as well. And all these, the Russians do. They still, because they are the permanent members of the Security Council, nobody can actually take any steps against them. I would rather see the Security Council scrapped. This is basically an elite body that sits above every single other human on this planet and pushes them around because they have more guns. Simple as that, and I'm sick and tired of basically the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese and all that always getting their way. And that's why I basically believe in the General Assembly, where smaller players and smaller countries can say, that's not on. We want a world that actually works for us as well. So that's my personal opinion anyway on that front. Anyway, probably going to get some flack for it, but I don't care. Why don't I invite a few people in this stream on the chat? I'm waiting for Jared, actually. He hasn't turned up. I have actually I did invite Luke, and if anybody wants to approach me and contact me, yeah, I've got no problems in actually inviting people. I've even invited some vegans that have argued with me on the interwebs and said, "Yep, just come on, let's have a debate." So yeah, I invite a lot of people, but unfortunately, nobody gets back to me. Maybe because I don't have a lot of subs, and I don't know. So I have tried that, Bart, believe me, but up until now, it hasn't happened. Maybe I need to invite other people in the community as well, and contact them and see, whether anybody wants to come on. So I will have to put out more feelers in that regard. It's probably because I had this slot for, with me and Jared have been doing this for quite some time now. Together, like he's nearly ended up like a co-host nearly in that regard, and we sort of joke between ourselves and and stuff like that, and so we generate a bit of sort of banter. And it's been working quite well, and that's probably one reason why I haven't sort of thought about bringing a lot of other people, even though I've mentioned it to people. Luke knows that, yes, he does. He was invited, but for family reasons and all that, and because it's not that easy for him, which I understand. Which is And zombie mukbang. I never get notifications of live streams. Yeah. Oh, look, I actually, last night I actually, there was, a guy, Sam Feldman, that basically is a British young bloke that I actually had subbed really way back years ago, because this was in my early days back in 2013, 14, in the early days of, keto, low carb and stuff like that I was doing. We're talking about 7 years ago. And I actually went to his to show something of his doing the 5,000 calories of different types of macros. And lo and behold, I was unsubbed, which really annoyed me. I actually resubbed to his, but I'm going, what the fuck? I just, because you just presume, you're still subbed with people, and you go back, you notice notifications are turned off, or, no idea, it just, I don't think there is somebody in YouTube deliberately going through and doing that. I think the way the algorithms have been written, the algorithms basically, really just working against these people. These AIs are out of control, and they've given them parameters, and they have a very, we're talking about machines here. There's no human in the loop, and these machines basically go, black and white. They have a black and white attitude, and we're on the wrong side of that ledger, and they are just literally hammering us at the moment, the AIs. So yes, we are victims of the AIs. Yes, those damn fucking Terminators, Luke. It should be giving you ideas. The carnivore community fighting these AIs. The YouTube AIs that should be giving you some creative, juices, bubbling up to sort of help you create something. We've actually got the other one. Where's the other one? Hold on. Let me just bring up the other one. That was last night's. Where did I put that? Here. I think in this folder. That was a Star Trek one, remember, Luke? Yeah, let me just try and find it. Probably saved it in the wrong folder. There it is. May the force be with you. That was fun. uh, now we need a new one for today. Just lost my damn spot. What was that? Good thing I never said I could drop 20 whenever Harry says, basically. Mate, you're killing yourself. We may make that a compulsory thing. Just kidding. Yep. You can have different ways of making things. Infamous legend. It's good to see you guys actually having a good time. We have more decentralized blockchain-based services. We need more. Yeah, we need. Yeah, probably. It'd be useful in that regard. Sort of secure, not controlled. There's a lot of things, you know my views about direct democracy. I've been saying for some time, so it's really this sort of technology. We're getting a point where we can use this sort of technology to create very secure ways of basically enacting that, But as I said, you're going to have a fight from the left and you're going to have a fight from the right who basically don't want to lose their privileges and their, all these political parties, because in a direct democracy, you don't need political parties. They're not required because basically you've got structures and all that can actually work. And as long as people get civic education and all that to understand, there's a period of transition, it can work quite well. So, the Athenians built an entire freaking empire from, it's not as if the commons can't run things. They can run it. When people are forced to step up, they will step up, as citizen soldiers and many other things. But, when we've got a situation where for a very long time, we're basically being brainwashed to accept, the authorities, that sort of appeal everybody has. If you look at, you go on the web, majority of people are all still appealing to authority, So that's why I say, it's probably a pipe dream for me. I won't live to see direct democracy. There'll be a lot of people that will fight for it, a lot of people that will work for it, and as middle class become more educated, greater in number in our modern world, they will demand more rights. They don't want to basically have some group up there telling them what to do, how to run their lives, So it's only basically, you can only have a rentier type or peasant type society where you've got aristocrats running the show, is when you basically dumb down the population, keep them under control and keep them uneducated and all that, because they don't have the capacity to organize and fight back. That's why they fear us. They actually fear us. It's not, so their projection on us of fear is because they fear us, and it's really important to understand that, The elites basically put out fear because that's the only way. If we fear the situation or fear them or think they're reptiles or think they're this or that or whatever, we're too scared to act, too scared to respond. And so we remain sort of, docile, non-reactive, we just take it, rather than basically saying, fuck you. And that's a sort of difference. And all these misdirects like Frankie does and all these other people like, David Icke and people like that, they're all misdirects, because basically they instill fear rather than instill basically, the sort of what I say, where you basically grow a spine and don't put up with the bullshit. The problem is most people are basically made to fear, so they rather than actually growing a spine, they pull their spine apart. So when you listen to these people, the contradictions are immense. That should tell you something. They got no fucking idea what they're talking about, And you have to look back in history. I always look at history. Since the pharaohs to today, the elites have been doing the same little game. When the pharaohs were around, what did they do? They basically made themselves as gods to say, we can give you an avenue to heaven. We can build these basically big pyramids, and you guys can lay down here your bodies when you're dead, and I will basically guide you to the other world, to the other side. So it was basically a porthole to heaven. And those fuckers worked their fucking asses off because there were no slaves. They were free citizens, and they basically literally worked their fucking asses off to build those damn pyramids. Majority of the citizenry were basically peasants, and they were free. They weren't slaves, So there may have been some war slaves, but the majority that built the pyramids weren't slaves. And that's what people don't understand, unless you look at history. But, the fear of God, the fear of afterlife, all this sort of stuff, that's how they control, They control with fear. So it's all about intensifying the fear, the fear of the terrorist. You're more likely to basically be run over by a bus than be killed by a terrorist. So let's strip all your rights, rather than making buses more safer. It's that illogical level. How come before, in the past, when we had the Red Brigades, when we had the Irish Republican Army and all these other terrorist groups that were doing terrorism, we didn't strip away all our rights, and good policing was able to manage a lot of that and keep it under control. Do you know what I mean? We're coming to a crisis point again in our history, where we've got massive levels of private debt, public debt, everything's really becoming unstable. The international order is becoming unstable. Rivalries between nation states are starting to happen. And they want to control their populations. Because when you control a population, you can basically give them a gun and you can go and fight for the German elite as a German, for the American elite as an American, for the Australian elite as an Australian. And you can go and fucking butcher yourself so they can basically make more profits. And that's basically what they want. That's how they operate. Since the pharaohs, they've been basically getting the poor little fucking suckers that are fearful and scared and looking for the afterlife as well. And they can basically throw them on the battlefield and say, you go and fight the Hittites. And the Hittites are going, their kings are going, those assholes, you go and take those on. We'll look after you. They've been doing it for a very long time, believe me, And I mean, I've got family that's fought in wars, and they were good patriots, but a lot of them basically got used and spat out, and it happens around the world, all over the place. People who love their homeland and basically get misused by these elites, and that's what happens. You go and steal somebody else's oil rather than trade with them fairly, this is the sort of things that basically these people do. This is how they've operated for a very long time. It's nothing new. All this BS that, Frank talks about and all that. As long as you basically in the paradigm where you fear them or think of them as demigods, like they will be promoted, these sort of reptilian gods. When you promote people like that, how can you fight that? The fear and all that. That's a control mechanism. So David Icke is basically he is with them. Control mechanism. You just have to look at how these people operate. They got linkages back to the establishment, a lot of them. You just have to take Earthling Ed. Same thing. He's got linkages back to the royal family and the establishment and all that sort of stuff. All these people, when you look back, you find all these linkages back to establishment and all that. Back to friends, powerful friends. So do you think they are actually saying all this sort of stuff out there and are very well known and basically then associating with some of these people? Don't you think that's strange? Would these people openly associate with these people or have friendships? That's when you start looking at that sort of stuff, you realize how we're being conned big time. It's one way of saying it. I don't think they're listening to us. Yes. Yeah, look, it took me a while to do that, to unsubscribe. It basically, the recent stuff is what really just, a lot of his antics, I put it down to childhood behavior, being a child and not having grown out of that sort of phase of basically having to be nasty to people. And selfish and all that sort of stuff that children are, for good reason, because they need to basically get as many resources as they can to grow up strong and vibrant. But when they continue that for the rest of their life, they basically become pricks. Yeah, I say the gloss sort of was starting to wear off. It's sort of my sort of attitude was, he was part of the carnivore community, be supportive, sort of excuse some of the indiscretions in some regards, and that's what I did. But at some point, gets beyond the pale, it's just too much. You go, oh fuck, I've had enough of this shit. Do we have to listen to this crap anymore? Yeah, look, yeah. The thing is, people just, like that, fellow carnivores being nasty like that. Yeah, we all have disagreements with things. We don't have to basically, really turn on each other like that. Oh, look, I hope he changes his ways and comes back to the community at some time. I don't have any ill feelings towards him or anyone. But, he's not basically doing things that are basically going to endure him to me. It's just not going to happen, especially with that sort of behavior that he's got, constantly attacking people and constantly making things up, no evidence. I always say to these people, it's like, when we did the 5G thing, I said to Luke, where's your evidence? I presented stuff, but he had, that's a problem with a lot of people. They, and then they go, oh, it's going to really do a lot of damage. And I'm going, well, 5G has less penetrating ability. That's why they need more towers compared to 4G. So even the radiation side, which, we've shown with the science doesn't actually hold up, So why would one be worse when it needs more towers because it doesn't have good penetration? You can go behind a wall and it literally just drops out like buggery. It just doesn't make sense in that regard. So there's a lot of things. And at the end of the day, if you're going to be an empiricist scientist, you basically, it has to be based, you have to have evidence to be able to back things up that you've got. The only things that we've got in terms of electromagnetic fields, and in terms of, non-native EMFs and stuff like that, and the blue spectrum and stuff like that, there's sort of effects on circadian rhythms, on, all these sort of issues about, that affect our ability to sleep properly, to basically detox, so the sort of in regards to the redox potential, that sort of side. It's really at that level that we're actually looking at, the sort of other stuff where they're talking about the radiation effect, not there. The sort of DNA damage, not there. None of that, I mean, there's no evidence for it. There's one study after another, and we're talking about independently sourced, from, I don't even look at North America, Verizon or whatever the different companies are that do their studies, or AT&T. I'm actually looking at Asia and other countries that basically have no axe to grind. They're done by independent academics that don't even work for any industry, and they're not finding those things. If they were finding them, yep, there's anecdotal, anecdotal means zero evidence. It's just anecdotal, there could be other factors. There could be a play in people's environment. Maybe some people are more sensitive. Like a lot of people sometimes are sensitive to certain things, like irritants in the environment, or like material, like fabrics, and they will just break out in a rash where most people don't. So there could be other things at play. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen to some people, but I'm saying that, we don't have any real proof that it happens, so, and it could be also the placebo effect. If you really believe something, you can either get worse or better because you really believe it. So we've got to be very careful about this, because placebo effect is very powerful. So there's all sorts of possibilities. So, and that's why you need to do proper randomized control clinical studies and stuff like that, and isolate things to be able to work out what is really happening and all that, So, yeah. Look, I know he basically just lashes out all the time, especially recently. Recently, he's really become negative and really, sort of, I actually, because somebody actually told me, and I actually went and actually checked, emailed me, and I actually checked part of his live stream on the new one, which is the Frank 2 Tofano that he uses now for the live streams. And I actually went and checked one of the things, and he basically was giving somebody a hard time, and I'm going, fuck, you can be a bit diplomatic, mate, behave, I mean, people may have, people come onto mine and they'll say something, and, I'll disagree with it, but, you don't need to become nasty about it, or, or stuff like that, so. And I'll put people's up, I've put people's up opinions and stuff like that have got different political or different views on certain things. And I'll basically say, I'll give them my opinion. I'll put their opinion up. It's not, you don't have to become nasty, and if you don't want to put their opinion up, you don't have to put it up, you just ignore it, and, so it's, yeah. The nation state is obsolete and antiquated. Yeah, I mean, ancient Greece showed that you don't have to have a Greek state. You can have basically regional sort of entities that basically can self-govern themselves. That's true, So it's not, you don't have to have a certain structure in that regard. As I said, when it comes to, I'm not really into like alliances around the world, like NATO, like, these European blocs where they impose their sort of will on people. I don't believe in those sort of structures. I believe in sort of general treaties through the General Assembly of the United Nations. I get rid of the Security Council, have just a General Assembly that represents all countries. They come together and they decide, we're going to agree on certain things. Let's say it takes them 10 years to do that, to get to a certain level of consensus or a certain level of majority vote, depending on how they want to do it. At least we will have the majority of people around the world agreeing on a number of standards and a number of things, the way they should be run and all that. That's a much better and stable form without having anybody basically dominating that and imposing their will and stuff like that. So, but the nation state's a very recent thing anyway. It's only been around for about 200 odd years for most parts of the world. There were no nation states prior to that. There were basically kingdoms. There were basically sort of regional sort of entities of one sort or another. But the nation state is a very recent thing. And it's a much more organized form of running the show, so to speak. And it's got its upsides in some regards in terms of, the regulatory side of things. But on the other side, it basically means that it makes it much easier for small elites to control political parties and political entities and then impose their way of doing things. And that's why I sort of say, let's campaign at the local level of getting some direct democracy, a bit like they have in Switzerland. They have direct democracy at the cantons, like at the local level. And they also have the right to sort of, on major national issues, they can vote as a population. They can reject the government on some treaty or some major national issue or some major national policy, which is good. They tried to actually, what was that, a couple of years ago, they actually tried to bring in some legislation to help the banks out, and the population went out and voted against it. So the banks got the finger from the population. And that's the sort of direct democracy at this early stage is possible. The sort of the ultimate type that I'm talking about is much further in the distant future, where you really have to get the local level where people get used to it again, psychologically get used to it, turning up in an assembly, talking their mind with their local, with people in their locality, and making decisions about how things are run in their locality. And as people become more experienced, more capable, then you can basically take it to the next level. And that's where blockchain and all these sort of technologies will be able to come in to basically help make that possible, for the whole population. So it's that, and also social media. Don't get me wrong, will help with that as well, because it means that people will be able to put their opinions and all that, and try to popularize them and all that. As long as you've got a social media platform that doesn't restrict opinions. So you'd have to basically set something up within your own country that basically allowed free for all and people to be able to see all sorts of opinions and have a very big discourse on a number of issues for a certain period of time that would be set, and then basically vote on it. And so those sort of things are possible, and those sort of things are possible to campaign within the present time. The ultimate thing will take much longer. I don't think you can just gravitate immediately to that without a revolution. I mean, the Athenian citizens actually rebelled and overthrew the aristocrats, the king, remove the king from power. So, and there was a lot of talk in the early parts of the American Revolution. There was a lot of talk about whether to have direct democracy or to have basically, a representative democracy, and the people pushing the representative side, especially from the South, basically won. So funny thing is, a lot of them today are, promoting a very different, but their ancestors had a very different opinion. They wanted to have control over people, especially slaves, but they wanted to have control. And if you had, sort of a citizenry type assembly, that wasn't going to work for them. So they were pretty much opposed to it. And some of the industrialists in the northeast of the United States were also against it. So, yeah, they sort of won the day. But yes, there was a point there, a very slim, to be honest. But yes, there was a point there. Had that movement been more organized, America could have been a very different state today. So I've unfollowed 2 of the 3 carnivores for attacking fans and others. Yep. I just want science and health discussions. Yep, me too. That's all we're here for, basically, to help people. As I said, I have cardiovascular disease. The only reason I'm here is basically, can I help people? If I can't, why am I wasting my time? I can enjoy my own time. I mean, I've got a day job, so I don't need to do this. I do it voluntarily because I want to, but I don't need to do it. I don't live off YouTube. I don't need it. So for me, I do it because out of, last night I did 4 hours. I was going to do 2 hours and I ended up doing 4 hours. So because I enjoy doing it. I enjoy basically trying to give information out, having a bit of fun, a bit of banter and stuff like that. And that's why I do it. So those are my reasons anyway. Other people have different reasons, but it's just the way it is. Plenty of them around. Believe me. Why is it always political, Harry? I'm a free marketeer, anarchist, agnostic for the most part. We have to use decentralized blockchain systems to end around all this nation state bullshit. Look, most people that may think that way, we're a minority at this point in time. That's why I say small steps. Small steps can achieve some of that sort of stuff, but big steps, very hard. Sometimes it's easier to skin a cat by increments rather than one big foul swoop. I mean, it can happen. Don't get me wrong. You can have a population that at some point can become quite rebellious, quite conscious of, the BS. And it can happen very rapidly. But it can also end up in quagmire and shit. We've seen examples after example around the world where we've had rebellion and then better organized elements that were much nastier took control of that movement and took it in a completely different direction. That's where the risk is. That's why I sort of, looking back in history and all the moments, there have been very slim few moments where it has actually worked, And so I've sort of come back to the realization that a peaceful approach and a peaceful transition is a much safer way for the rest of us, It's not the quickest way, but it's the safest way. That's what history's taught me when I look back at history and the human condition, the human animal, I mean, and I give an example to people that when I'm sometimes I've been at airports or certain things and all that, you see all these people rushing like mad, that's the reptilian brain back there just directing them, people like me who's more maverick-like, I sort of sit back and sort of go, But then again, if there's an animal coming, I may get stomped for being a bit too, let me think about it, So there are advantages and disadvantages in that regard. But what I'm trying to get to is that, people can sometimes end up in very dark places when they try to make, radical changes. That's the risk that I find with that. So I believe in sort of educating people and slowly moving towards a better paradigm over time, introducing some of this decentralized blockchain technology for services and many other things, and slowly trying to build these sort of things and promote the ideas of the economies of scale, the efficiencies, that are basically, these sort of things, and try in small increments and small steps and small bits and pieces here and there to gradually a gradual change, an evolutionary change, that doesn't basically create massive upheaval. That's sort of my view on that. Yeah, I'd love if we were all basically logical, all humans were logical, and never engaged their reptilian brain. It would really work very easily, But that's not the reality of the human condition. Even sometimes I'm not very logical, and I go, oh, I have to pull myself up because we're humans, sorry. Yep. I agree with a lot of that sort of stuff myself, but yes. Yes, not the best organisation, but for international stuff, it still doesn't. I sort of believe in the General Assembly of all countries. Having a bit of both poor and rich, having a fair say on a lot of issues. But definitely the G20 is much more representative than the G7. God, I mean that's just you know the ultimate elite group. This is a minor elite group in that regard. It's still not representative of the world. Um, and the reality is, the world economy, only big players can play. Yeah. And the only reality why we need these sort of arrangements, international arrangements, is because we need to trade things. We've been doing it since, primitive times. We've been trading. Even tribal societies traded things. We don't produce everything. You produce oil, I produce this. They can't basically live off oil. They can't eat oil. They need to trade oil to get food because it's a desert environment, you know. So we need to trade amongst ourselves, because if we don't trade, we will go to warfare. When you've got scarcity and you can't trade freely and peacefully with others to get certain things that they have that you don't have, and you can sell them things that you have that they don't have, you know, there is no incentive for them to come and go for you, or you to go for them. You know, it's just a reality of our ape-like brains. We basically, if we pushed into a corner, yeah, it's like the Japanese, for instance. The Americans had competition with the Japanese over the Pacific for many years. I mean, from the time when Perry turned up and tried to force the Japanese to open up their markets. What did the Japanese do? They went to the British, made an alliance with the British, forced the Americans away, and were able then to dominate the Western Pacific with British support, because the British were the most powerful navy in the world at the time. And that basically, curtailed American ambitions at the time. But America, the ruling class of America still wanted to become dominant, like all kings and elites around the world. They always, as they grow and become more powerful, they think that they should run the roost, so to speak. And, the roosters start competing amongst themselves, and we get trodden on and we get butchered in the process, the rest of us. But basically, when it came to the Japanese, they basically came out of the Great Depression much faster because they got off the gold standard and made some reforms to their economy, because they were bleeding gold out of their they just couldn't sustain it. Not that I agree that fiat currency is the best thing to do, but at least they didn't basically start printing money like crazy or doing anything crazy like that. It just was a way of basically, being able to regulate their exchange rates and stuff like that. But on the other hand, the Americans started putting pressure on the British, because the British were dependent on American supplies of oil, guns, and finance. And, they had the British over a barrel. So the British basically caved in and abandoned the alliance with Japan. Many people don't know that actually the ANZAC troops that were actually transported from Australia and New Zealand to Gallipoli and many other parts of the Western Front were actually transported by Japanese transport ships, many of them. We were good allies up until the late 1930s, that the friction between the US and Japan started increasing, competition between the two countries over the Pacific. And as that competition we were forced out. Australia was told by the British, being part of the Commonwealth, that you will no longer trade with Japan. And there were big protests about loading up ships with iron ore heading to Japan at the time as well. And there was a lot of that sort of stuff. And Japan was basically cut off. 70%, I think it was around 70%, I may be wrong, the exact percentage, but it was either 60 or 70%, it could have been higher, of their oil supply came from the US. So the US cut off their oil supply. They cut off their markets. The British cut off entirely their raw materials coming out of Australia. So the Japanese were sitting back and going, we're an industrial, we only produce industrial products. We've got no capacity. We've got nothing, no mining in our country, no oil in our country. So what are we going to do? We're going to go and take it. So the democratically elected government, which had brought the country out of depression very fast, and had actually improved the economic situation in Japan, was overthrown by the military. And basically, the military put their own people in and basically went to war as militarists. So their solution was, well, if you're not going to trade with us, we're going to go and take it. And that's what they did. And that's what people have been doing for thousands of years. You don't want to trade? We're going to come and get it. You, Saddam Hussein, don't want to give us the oil? We're going to come and get it. It's been happening for day immemorial, But we're told, these bad Japanese, now they're our great friends. So the elites will demonize somebody and then undemonize them depending on who they want you to fight. You are their cannon fodder. Send you out there to basically you die for them so they can make this and dominate other parts of the world. So yeah, they've been doing it to us since the pharaohs, as I always say, unfortunately. So yeah, that's exactly right. Those big players, they don't give a shit about us. I can go and sit in Japan, in China, in Russia, in Peru, or any other country and sit in there and talk with a local, and he's pretty much, we'll get on. We may not understand each other very well, but we'll get on. He's got the same problems as me. He's got his family problems. He's got his kids' problems. He's trying to feed his kids or his family, or he's trying to get employment and stuff like that. We're all got similar problems. When you really sit down with an average person in any country, and the reason why I understand this is because I've traveled to so many parts of the world from a youngster, and I've seen it. I've spoken to people. Fundamentally, people are decent. Fundamentally, people are good. Unfortunately, they allow their uneducated reptilian brain to be manipulated by powerful elites, and they are pressed into service to kill other people. Not for their interests, but for others who are going to benefit big time. Yes. It's the way the world works, unfortunately. Yes. But for 3 million years, we lived as, tribal people around the fireplace where we all had a bit of a say, and we all basically worked pretty well together. Yeah, thanks, for your support. I appreciate it a lot. I appreciate everybody's support, that comes to this site. Yes, we still live in a very violent and, yes, difficult world for the majority of us, for the 99% of us. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate your support. Yeah, they do. Look, I'm not against discussing things, in a sensible way and having debates and stuff like that on these issues and how we can go forward and how we can basically make this planet a better, more workable planet for the majority of us. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we get into stupid conspiracies and, crazy sort of stuff, it doesn't help anyone. Because 99% of the population out there, when they hear that, they're going to go, what? They're just going to turn off. They're not even going to listen. They'll just switch off. Once people switch off, they're not interested. You've got Buckley's chance getting to them. And so that's why I primarily focus on health and science and stuff like that, like Bart does and people like that. We don't sort of get really into the politics for those reasons, primarily because we're trying to, get people on the right path. But, and when we do talk politics, it's usually sort of sensible stuff, things that basically are not, crackpot stuff and stuff like that, things that are helpful for people in that regard, sort of nudge them. And that's what I mean, nudging, not forcing, not lecturing, not pushing, but nudging in the right direction where they start sort of engaging their own mind and saying, that doesn't sound bad, And that's the sort of best way, where some of these other crackpots, they go, they either whack you over the head or tell you basically the end of the world's going to come and the reptiles are going to take over. Yeah, exactly. You're welcome, mate. Exactly. Yeah. Look, my family comes from a rural background, so I sort of have an inherent bias towards farmers and people like that. But I'm honest about it. I think they're the salt of the earth. They're very easygoing people. Um, and very honest people. Straightforward. There's no bullshit from them or anything like that. You can just sit around and just have a bit of a joke and stuff like that, and have an honest conversation with people like that. Fortunately, when you hit the cities, the big smoke, everybody's trying to basically they want to push something. So yeah, they're less than but I won't say any. Oh, look, I'm a city slicker as well. There are good people in cities, but there are also plenty of con artists around. Less than savory people. Good to hear. I'll just go through some of these and then good to see you, mate. Morning, evening, all. Yes. We had a late session. You stayed up late. So did I, unfortunately. And yes. You don't, do you? You're a slave. Yes, he's got some weird opinions about, yes, even though for 1.5 million years humans have basically been cooking food before even slavery existed. So it's a bit weird. He has some sort of strange dietary type. But anyway, at least he's not, let me put it this way. He has some weird ideas on nutrition and weird ideas about, things like raw meat and cooked meat, which sort of don't stack up to evidence. But he's not complete, Frank's actually worse than him now, in terms of a whack job, he can actually even articulate something half reasonable. And he does primarily focus on diet and the vegans and stuff like that. So, I actually find him less unpalatable compared to Frank. That's the funny thing, for a long time, I sort of had misgivings, but, at the end of the day, I sort of disagree with his sort of views on raw and cooked meat and stuff like that. But, and some of the other stuff that he does, the anti-vegan stuff and all that, I'm very supportive of that. Give them a bit of stick. They talk nonsense and talk shit. So, I don't have to agree with everything every carnivore says. But if they're doing out there, they're out there taking on the veg-tards and all that, I'm supportive of that. I don't have to agree with everything that Zverich actually says, but I'm supportive of, his, being a strong advocate for our lifestyle in the general terms. Yep. Yes. They do have a lot of restrictions. It's a lot of people to follow. Damn. God, do you sleep? Yeah, I know, exactly. I recently went through and sort of some of the old paleo stuff and some of the stuff that I don't follow anymore. Some of the sort of things, some of the keto stuff, which are very plant orientated, have become very plant orientated, like keto, sort of vegetarianism or stuff like that, have become very plant orientated, or basically pushing all these plant type compounds and stuff like that, like Rhonda Patrick does and stuff like that. I've sort of dropped off those ones. I've sort of culled those out and go, well, do I really want to listen to this nonsense? If I want a hermetic effect, I'll go and do some exercise. It's rather than poisoning my body to get a hermetic effect. It's just, yeah, that is shitloads. Yes. Mate, you're not keeping up. Gusto's got one eye over you, mate. You're not keeping up, Poor performance, mate, poor performance. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. A bit like vegan deterioration. Some of these, sites, they're really good in actually exposing the dark side of veganism, which is good, and we need that, So, as I said, I don't agree with everything that he actually says, but I still occasionally check some of his videos and like them, you know. So I'm not completely black and white when it comes to him, but some of the stuff is a bit, the raw versus cooked, and some of the other sort of stuff. The arguments that he makes are a bit ridiculous, but people have got if he wants to eat like that, fine. I don't really, that's good for him. If that's the way he wants to do carnivory. Who am I to disagree with him on that? It's just basically I don't like the way he sort of whips the rest of the carnival community in regards to that issue and a couple of other issues. But on the general front, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, he can contribute. He contributes far more to our community than what Frank does in many regards, because he exposes some of this sort of stuff and all that. And he does a good job of doing that. He may not be very strong with the actual, popped out of my ear again, with some of the science and stuff like that, may not be able to articulate or argue certain scientific, premises and stuff like that. But at least basically he's doing some good work out there in terms of, exposing the dark underbelly of the vegan movement. And we need people like that, to do that. Musician channels. Look, I tend to, like things like aerospace and stuff like that, and and some other sciencey stuff, physics and stuff like that. So I follow some of the other, a lot of channels of that sort of stuff as well. History stuff. I've got a lot of links to that I subscribe to a lot of history stuff, related things, in that regard, because I've always been a bit of a history buff from a young age. So yeah, there's nothing wrong. I even have a few with some music stuff as well that I like. It's important that we have a very eclectic way of viewing the world, and an eclectic, richer sort of tapestry of interests. Oops, I just overshot again. Fantastic. That's great. Good on you, Harry. Need to find my spot. Fantastic. Now it won't actually allow me to. Let me just give me a sec, guys. Sorry about this. I just need to basically find my bearings, because it's just need to go back to YouTube and try and find that location. So I can find it here. I can't find it. It's beyond that point. Damn. God, I hate it when it does that. So I'll have to, I've just missed a whole lot. It's actually thrown me completely out, which is a real bugger. Anyway, so I'll just go to the sort of the topish. You don't see the color, but other people does. Not sure about that. In what regard? It's probably somebody else's comment or whatever. Oh, some book. Okay, it's a different conversation. Okay, I won't jump into that. I'll just try and find another. Yes, he was. Yeah, I don't know what's happened with him. We're now we're in 2 hours into it now, but yeah, no idea where he is. Not exactly. I'm not a Ron Paul fan, so yeah, very, very different in that regard. But the approach, the transitional approach, we have a similar view of the way of doing it, going about it. Yep, in that regard. And World Bank, who people start to, look, a lot of these organizations have been basically infiltrated by, like, if you look at the health organization, it's a funny organization. The World Health Organization has got really good scientists that actually go out and do, like, communicable disease research, like Ebola and stuff like that, frontline stuff like that. They really do really good work. But that section has nothing to do with the nutritional section. The nutritional section, on the other hand, is dominated by industry players who have pushed their people in there. That's the problem. They don't care about, people that are out there fighting communicable diseases like SARS, MERS, like Ebola and stuff like that. They want the best people there because those people are going to do a good job in containing the disease, in basically developing good policy for that. But in the nutritional part of the WHO, they don't want those sort of people, good scientists. They want the people that work for them to basically push their narrative, because that helps them then sell their shit grain and all the other crap that they sell around the world, the big food companies. So that's the thing. Not all organizations or parts of their organizations are all equal. Believe me, they're not. And having experienced with government myself, I can tell you it's not, there are parts that actually are driven by ideologically a certain way, and other parts driven ideologically other ways, and certain people that have managed those parts that have brought people in that basically agree with them and can push a narrative or whatever. And that's what happens with all organizations. That's why direct democracy strips away all that garbage, or, the having international organizations that include all countries. So if you had the nutritionists with representatives that were elected by the assembly, you wouldn't get a whole lot of people from North America in that, stacking the decks, all of them, like Ansel Keys did, where when he took control of the American Heart Association, he basically bullied out a whole lot of his opponents and brought in a whole lot of his friends. And overnight, within a year, the whole policy changed from low carb type, view that the Heart Foundation had in the earlier days, to a more low fat type approach. So within a very short amount of time. And this is what happens in these organizations. But if you basically had representatives that were elected from all these different countries, you'd have people from all sorts of countries. And those people have different food traditions. And they'd say, we don't have these issues. What are you fucking talking about, you fucking retard? And they would basically disagree with these people and say, well, no, we have to have the best evidence. And where's your evidence? And so we wouldn't get this sort of situation. But what happens is you've got the Security Council with the major players, and the major players basically put their own people into all these organizations. It's like the IMF. The IMF has always been run by the French, because there's an arrangement between the US that the US will get the World Bank and the French will get the IMF and the OECD in France. And that's, and the whole reason was because the French were pissed off that they weren't getting their way, and the Americans said, we'll give you the OECD to hand out all the money through Europe when there was, the Marshall Plan and after the Second World War. So basically all these different major powers carved up these organizations and handed them to each other and put their own people there. And that's what happens, and then they push their narrative because that's for their businesses, So when we're talking about international organizations, they have been very highly corrupted, and that's the problem, and that's why I'm talking about the General Assembly scrapping the Security Council completely, having the General Assembly, elect these things and all that, because then it's very hard that you've got hundreds of countries with different views, and you're going to end up with some level of consensus that is closer to it's not perfect, but it's going to be closer to the truth than basically, or to the way things should be done than currently are being done, where they're being controlled by small groups of countries, and their elites that control those people directly, and they get their way in what is the international standard, what should be done, and how it should be done, and stuff like that. And that's where the problem lies, So yeah, it's unfortunate like that. You want to give up your reserve status, mate. You guys, with the level of debt you've got, who's going to back up the dollar then if you don't have a reserve status? That's the downside. No easy solutions to actually transition to something better. It's going to take some time, because you've got to convince people to give up this sort of stuff. Ending up certain things or institutions is not an easy thing, especially when you're so dependent on the fiat currency of your country. So not very easy. And again, at the same time, there is not enough gold to go around to basically back up any currency. So we're stuck with fiat currencies, but what we need is different arrangements that basically, constitutional structures or whatever, that prevent this sort of profligate behavior, where it restricts. I mean, in the past, if you think about it, the Athenians wanted to go to war. They said, well, they voted for war. The majority of them, they taxed, including themselves. So you want to go to war, it costs money. Well, cough up the money. Well, we'll cough up the money. So they were prepared to cough up the money because they wanted to go and, go to war. But, there's no free lunch anywhere. And that's the problem, Everybody wants to take it from the future, and leave somebody else holding the bag. At some point, you're going to have, things that will come to a crux. You can't do it forever. But at the same time, I agree. As a short-term thing, yep, you do need them, unfortunately, because they have a stabilizing effect. If you take a look before the Federal Reserve existed in the United States, go back and look at all the economic crisis, the boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. Continuously, every couple of years was happening. Why? It was happening because basically people, when they're out of control and you don't have the regulation of the flow of credit, they become over exuberant, and they overdo and they overcorrect. The difference is, back then, the only people playing this casino royale were big, wealthy financiers in the northeast of the United States. Most of the majority of the population wasn't even involved in the stock market, not even involved in a lot of assets, or basically the holding of asset certificates of any sort. Now the problem is the majority of the society does. So you were to go back to that 19th century type of boom bust. I can tell you it wouldn't take long before you had a revolution. Like back in those days, they used to have one rebellion. In Europe, rebellions, one after the other, class rebellions and all that used to happen. So it's not, while I disagree with a lot of the policies of the Federal Reserve, to get rid of them at this stage would be very dangerous and very unstabilizing. So, things, and some of these people that say, we should get rid of it and all that. And I go, well, yeah, let's do that. But what's going to happen when the plebs basically realize that their currency is worthless, they can't buy any food, they're going to come after you, mate. So that some of these big financiers that talk about or say this sort of stuff, this sort of economic libertarianism, which I oppose, for those sort of reasons, they will be the first ones that will be basically strung up. How fucking stupid can you be? The smart elites realize that. That's why they instill fear to control. So yes. It's a bit more complicated in that regard. Quarantine the Fed. Give them the fucking virus. They probably deserve it, a lot of them. Yep, they were. They definitely did a lot of war crimes, them and the Germans. Yep, pretty bad, shocking stuff. But my sort of nuanced idea is they could have basically peacefully traded with those other countries to basically get those materials. They didn't have to go to war with them, But what I'm trying to say is that sometimes if you basically get into these blocks and stop trading and create friction and animosity and all that, a lot of people engage the reptilian brain, not their, so they end up basically very easily dragged into war and stuff like that. So yeah, what the Germans did at the time as Nazis and the Japanese basically was, they were aggressors. Simple as that. And they killed a lot of people. 50 million people died on this planet because of their aggression. That's history. But there is underlying reasons why countries were driven to that. The sort of the severe reparations after the First World War were also a big factor that actually, but also the Germans mismanaged their situation. When they didn't make a payment to the French came in and actually occupied the Rhineland. And what did the Germans do as a response? They didn't recognize it, and they kept on paying people without getting any tax receipts. So they printed money to pay a whole lot of people in the Rhine region, but they didn't collect any taxes. So it was actually the conservative government that was in power at the time that actually generated that hyperinflation. So, and when that they settled with the French, and they started taking tax receipts and all that, that sort of came off. It settled down. But at that time, what happened was the Great Depression hit every single country around the world, and international credit started drying up. And as international credit started drying up, they found themselves in a deflationary spiral. They went from inflationary spiral into a deflationary spiral, and the deflationary spiral is what that collapse in basically demand in the economy. It's a bit like now we're in a deflationary spiral because of the coronavirus and the restrictions and all that. That deflationary spiral that actually destroys work, destroys investment, destroys the economy. It is that brought about the rise of both the far left and the far right in Germany. And at the end, basically, they fought it out, and eventually one of them was better organized and closer to the elites and won the day. And then basically they needed to get the money from somewhere, so they went to war. That whole idea of actually occupying the Czech Republic and the Sudetenland and all that, that helped them basically grab a whole lot of gold that wasn't theirs to cover some of their bills. and they funneled all that through Switzerland. And Switzerland basically remained neutral and was left alone by everybody because everybody was fucking funneling illegal money through that country. They were the only big beneficiaries out of the war, you know. So, and they sold a lot of arms to every country. They sold primarily to Germany, but also to a number of other countries, you know. So they really made a lot of money out of it as being the bankers and brokers for all of the transactions. Especially for the gold, because you can't eat gold at the end of the day. You steal it from others and then trade it with the Swiss, you know. So yes, another one of those stories. Let's try and get to some dietary stuff now. Thanks, y'all. Yes. Actually, the collapse is even much higher. 20% collapse has actually happened in 21 days. You know, where in the Great Depression, it actually took nearly an entire year before we got to that level. So this is significant in that regard. The question is, you know, how different countries are managing it. Like Australia's actually underpinned a lot of the actual like mortgages and a whole lot of other things in this temporary stage. How sustainable that is in the long run, nobody knows. And so, you know, could this be precipitous, quite precipitous? Or we're going to have, you know, two things can happen. Either going to become very precipitous. There's going to be more friction around the world, a loss of confidence, you know, and also more pulling back of credit, global credit. And that could precipitate a 1929 type crisis. But if that doesn't happen and there's a bit of international coordination, we may end up having something similar to 1921, where you get this, you know, rapid slowdown, and then you have this basically big damn boom like we had, which was the roaring 20s. So it's really hard to know which way it's going to go. It really depends on a lot of things like confidence in the market, you know, whether credit or capital flows out of certain parts of the world or many parts of the world rapidly from the key creditors. That's a risk. Then would have a 1930s style situation. If governments can maintain confidence between the different governments and try to sort of keep things not from spilling over into conflict or, you know, deterioration in international relationships, then we may have a 1921 effect. You know, so hard to say. I mean, my initial prediction was because of a lot of the QE and stuff like that, that the next crisis or the next Great Depression would be in 2025. I wasn't counting on the coronavirus happening in that regard. So I was sort of gearing up my retirement plans at 60, you know, in that period of time, being ready to buy cheap assets and stuff like that. I was sort of gearing myself all up to that, and then this happens, you know. So, you know, it sort of threw a spanner in the works, let's put it that way. But you know, yeah, hard to say. Where this is never, you know, it's never happened before. We've never closed the economy this way ever. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a bit of that back in the like with the Spanish influenza. There was a bit of that, but not to the extreme level. You know, I mean, things were, but there was still a lot of economic activity. People still went to work. There was still, you know, a lot of, you know, now, you know, places still open and stuff like that. This time about, it's very different. So I'm still scratching my head. You know, I hear a lot of different commentators say a lot of different things, but I'm still scratching my head. I'm still on the fence with a lot of things. Whether it's going to be a 1921 style, you know, it's going to be a roaring 20s sort of effect, and or whether it's going to be basically, you know, like 1929. No fucking idea. Unfortunately, the debt levels were much lower in 1921. The private debt levels are much higher now, much similar to after the Roaring 20s. That's what's worrying me. That's the big worry in that regard. So, yeah, don't know. Yep. Yeah, but it's hard to know. It's really, really hard, you know. It's not an easy thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, you know, private debt is very high. I mean, in Australia, something like 200% of GDP. But then we've also got this massive amount of, you know, we've got, you know, multiple, you know, more than, what is it getting now? Our superannuation, which is our retirement scheme, is like, you know, it's surpassed one time our GDP and sort of moving towards becoming double our GDP. So in terms of savings to debt, we've got a lot of savings in this country, in Australia. So, you know, as a, you know, in accounting, balancing out the balance sheet, you know, because at the end of the day, we've got a lot of collateral. So there's less, I have less fear for this country seeing a flight of capital. But because we've got so much, you know, of our own savings, massive pool of savings that we can draw on in that regard. So, but other countries are in a very different, much more precarious position. So it's really hard, you know, in that regard. And the transition out of it also really depends on, you know, how it's actually done. So it's, yeah, it's, we're in a very, very strange time in history. Let's put it, as the Chinese would say, we fucking live in interesting times. But I think somebody else, it was actually a British person that actually said that, I forget his name, that basically misquoted the Chinese. But yes, we'll still peddle the old, the error, the incorrect way. Yeah, anyway. See if I can get any. Okay, so you didn't realise that, Zach? Yeah, yeah. So very different type of lifestyle and very different types. Sort of there's no pretentiousness amongst those people. Most currencies around the world haven't got a lot of purchasing power. But the thing is, the nice thing about it is that all of them are in sync. All of them basically have massive devaluation globally. So they're all in the toilet. So in that regard, when it comes to purchasing goods and services or trading goods and services, they're very much at similar levels. So it's less of a problem. If there were major differences like there have been historically, that's when it becomes a big major problem in terms of the balance of payments between countries. You know, that's when things can really become very frictious, where one country is forced into austerity, where the other one's, you know, booming. That's when it becomes severely. It's what's happened in Europe because of the common currency, but no central fiscal structure to sort of, you know, to balance out the sort of deflationary and inflationary effects, where inflation was exported to the north and deflation was exported to the south, you know. And as a consequence, you had this balance of payments sort of crisis between the north and the south. And that really precipitated the economic, and you didn't have a fiscal arrangement to basically, like a federal system, to bail out the weaker states, like happened in the US or in Australia, in other parts of the world, that it usually happens in a federal structure. Europe didn't have that federal structure. They had a common currency with a monetary union, but no fiscal union or fiscal political structure to basically manage these sort of imbalances that were caused within that community. So it's sort of and with a current crisis, we have a lot of different forces at play. And that's what's making it very difficult, even for me, to try and work out what the fuck's going to happen next, you know? But I can tell you one thing where my biggest focus is not so much on those sort of fundamentals and how they're playing out. You know, in the previous crisis, I actually looked at how much tonnage was being traded. All these, I actually looked at these sort of things to see how the economy was slowing down, because trade was slowing down, certain activities were slowing down, and that's how I've picked up a lot of the crises, the previous ones, when they've happened, before they've happened. You know, and a lot of my friends go, "How the fuck do you work this out?" You know, and I'm looking at those sort of factors. But this time around, there's so much interplay with so many elements. I'm finding it very hard, you know. And I think that anybody that tells you out there that they are certain it's going to go this way or that way, all they'll do is they're basically both, BSing you, and they're both, half of them are going to be right accidentally, and the other ones are going to be right, or the other ones are going to be right accidentally if it goes the other way. I'm more focused at this stage on human sentiment, because human sentiment is going to determine how we come out of this crisis. If people really believe in the majority that things are going to go to shit, they may end up going to shit, because investors may panic and pull out. If, on the other hand, governments sort of, try and actually increase confidence, which they haven't really been doing much recently, and try and actually develop, some arrangements international to sort of stabilize things a bit, especially through the IMF and the special drawing rights, they could basically backstop some of the actual central banks to some extent, and sort of reduce the carnage in a sense. But is the current administration in the US interested in doing something like that? Doesn't seem like it. They're on a war path with China, unfortunately, which isn't good, and with the EU. And so, it looks more like some of the early 20th century or 19th century or whatever, rather than, something a bit more stable and all that. So I am far more worried because of the fractious political situation around the world at the moment. So yep. You should read up on Minsky, Hyman Minsky. He's pretty good. I don't agree with everything that he actually says, but he actually understands, these things a bit better than many others in terms of how they come about. He doesn't believe in this equilibrium shit, because it's not. Equilibrium shit works really well in a barter society like existed in the Roman Empire, in those sort of markets. The difference is, and this people need to understand, in a normal traditional marketplace, you produce something, you produce something, you sell it, and then you get a profit from that. You earn a profit from that. So you get some credit, in a sense. So you realize it in the future, not in the past. So you put in the effort, go out there and work your fucking ass off, create a whole lot of pumpkins, and then go and sell them in the marketplace. That's a commodity. That's what the world was, commodity traders, traditionally. That's what they're still teaching at university, which is frightening. What we did was we changed that. We took value from the future in the form of credit and basically provided it as investment. So now you didn't produce anything. You got credit. You got a whole lot of workers working for you. You appropriated part of their labor, because they weren't doing it anymore on the land or whatever, as a profit to pay back your creditors and stuff like that. You gave them some wages and all that, and then you sold the product, and then so You took value from the future to make that possible. Where in the past, you had to create something to basically get to the profit. So the mechanism is completely different. And what happens is people become over exuberant. They say, I can make more. So they borrow more, they invest more, they build more and all that. So capitalism, the capitalist market economy actually more rapidly grows. The barter economy, this is, you go back historically, those barter economies were very, they had very little. They had a couple of crises now. Then they were due to war, when the markets were overtaxed by the empires, like the Roman empires or whatever else, because they wanted more money off them, off the population, and that would create rebellions sometimes and whatever else. But generally speaking, in a barter economy, it's a far more stable sort of animal. But the moment you introduce credit into the system, you can basically leverage off that credit and basically build a big tower of debt. At some point, you overshoot what the economic capacity of the society is to basically continue providing you with a cash flow. And at that point, as your cash flow sort of dries up, your ability to service your creditors becomes a problem. And then you've got a crisis, because it happens to a lot of people at the same time. So capitalism is because of this nature of credit, has this ability. And people have talked about how to change it, how to basically modify it, how to have a reserve, not have a reserve, have something that backstops it. But then people eventually don't follow it. Even when we had gold standards, we sort of broke the rules each time, because that's what politicians do. And so overshot and then create a new crisis. The problem is that when you've got a lot of players in the marketplace, you've got basically, you're having the ability for people to leverage more than someone else because they can access credit. You're going to get these massive imbalances in society, and it's inevitable that you're going to go through boom bust crises every single time, and then every 70 to 100 years you go through a Great Depression, because you've jacked up so much debt at a certain point that you just can't go any further. You've got to the level where the level of productivity in the society and the level of efficiency in the society cannot match the sheer volume of debt that needs to be serviced anymore. And that's when the whole fucking thing piles into a pile of shit and goes belly up. And so any structure, whether you have a Federal Reserve, you don't have a Federal Reserve, whether you modify this or modify that or whatever, you're still going to have these boom bust cycles because you've got the credit system. So unless you get rid of the credit system and go back to a barter economy, a commodities-based economy, it's not going to, you never will resolve these contradictions in the capitalist system of generating new wealth, so it's just the way it works. Sorry, but a lot of people have tried. Believe me, a lot of people have tried, and they've come to the same conclusion. So the smart people, especially the elites and a few other people like myself, go, let's see when is everything going to go belly up, and when should I basically be in cash or gold or whatever, and sitting on the sidelines waiting for cheap equities. So, that's the reality, guys. Sorry, but that's the reality, and that's why I don't follow any isms. I don't race around sort of going, I believe in Keynesian, I believe in this, or I believe in that. None of it works. It sort of can work within certain constraints. Works great in models. So a bit like the climate change models. They work fine within the computer. You put them in the real world, they go to shit. And that's the reality, That's why I don't really follow any isms or any type of beliefs in that people have out there. The reality is that if you wanted to get rid of fiat currencies completely and go back to, you'd never get it past the current politicians because they couldn't sell it to the populace. Even the populace who believe, you go and ask people who believe in the gold standard, when you tell them the consequences, if we were to go straight to the gold standard from this point in history, straight to the gold standard, what would it mean to living standards and severe austerity? Are they willing to wear that? No. And so, it's all basically academic, theoretical, and stuff like that. But the reality is, in the real world, nude. So it takes time and policies to basically correct these things. It's like Australia; they basically brought superannuation. They reformed their whole of their institutions to integrate themselves into China and other parts of the world for trade, and they became competitive. There are no subsidies in Australia for farmers. Though the only money that the farmers get in Australia is when they need it. If they've had fires or plagues or famines or whatever, the severe stuff, shit that here he is. G'day, mate.
Hey, Harry, how's it going?
We're talking politics.
We're talking politics
and economics, and we've walked away completely from nutrition.
Hey, that's fine.
Ask me.
That's fine. That's fine. Conversation's conversation. It's good to foster community.
That's true. That's true.
Hopefully, there's a little bit of disagreement going on. I hope we're not too homogeneous here.
No, there's there's very diverse type of language out there and stuff like that. The only problem with Bitcoin is, I suspect, if it doesn't work for them, if the elites can't control it and the bankers can't, the politicians in particular can't control it, they will ban it. They've banned things in the past, or they'll take control of it and regulate it. So a lot of these things, in America back in the Great Depression, what they did was they actually literally went around with police officers and took people's gold away from them. They confiscated it.
I didn't know that.
There was a lot of that sort of stuff that was actually taken, in that time. And they could very easily pass a piece of legislation and literally appropriate every single Bitcoin.
Yep.
So, when people say this, I say, well,
And the people that say that their Bitcoin wallet is encrypted, they can just prohibit the transaction. They can just make it so that as soon as the money is spent, it's taken.
Precisely. Or they can shut it down, the whole thing.
Right.
And then it's finished, gone. So. States are very powerful. People need to realize that. And if states are basically feel threatened, or elites feel threatened, they will clamp down on anything that basically goes against them or doesn't work for them. Either they'll appropriate it or they'll ban it, one of the two. And that's the history. You go back thousands of years, they've been doing it for ages, So
people are calling me slurs in the chat. Take off your blinkers says I look full on kale. I resent that comparison. I smacked my head pretty well earlier. Here you can see the bump better in this light right here.
Yeah, I can see that.
I was loading soil into my car with the tailgate up. And,
fuck! Yeah, I've done that as well.
It was a good whack. It's a good thing I'm so hard-headed, is what I said about it.
Yeah, I actually did. I think. I can't remember whether I did it with my sister's car or my mate's car, and I sort of ran into it was, sort of, I had something similar that happened to me, but not as severe as yours. Yours looks nasty. God, were you running into it?
Yeah, I was hefting like a really heavy bag of topsoil.
Oh, the force. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and so I was lifting it out of
with a lot of force,
four-wheeler trailer and into my trunk where the tailgate was up like that. Right
Gotcha.
I haven't hit my head like this in a long time, though. It was
exactly. It looks nasty.
It'll probably go some colors in the next few days. We'll see.
You'll get a scar. You'll get a scar as well.
Yeah, maybe. And, it didn't split it quite too badly, but it's sore.
And Luke, he didn't put much of an effort in, did he? You can't really make a good sort of image of him. Not a good effort, what you could actually do one with him sort of offloading milk contraband from one vehicle to the other and literally hitting his head. You could do something like that. It'd be a good one. I'm giving him creative ideas.
You could do me with like a cartoon style goose egg that just like a big bump that raises straight up.
That'd be good.
I was diving mouth first at an animal I was trying to catch. Says NecroKitty. I was fighting for raw milk with ruffians. Yeah, there's a lot of feral raw milk customers that sort of come out of the bush every time that they sense they smell it is what it is, right? As soon as it's poured off, and I have to quickly
you mean
get it
you
into
need
my
to beat
car.
them off.
Yeah. No, it was a rival raw milk gang roughing me up for acquiring raw milk on their turf.
There you go. Works for me. Sounds like a good story. We'll stick with that. So where are we? Let's go back to... so Daniel, I can find, and even if you provide evidence to people who tell me I'm going to die eating carnivore style, it's also funny how most people tell me I'm going to die are typically fat and unhealthy. Yeah, I know. I get those sort of things from people that are basically have got health problems, and basically they're telling me that, and you go, what the fuck? I mean, I had a scan in January, and basically, no scarring in the actual heart muscle at all, zero scarma, and that's really important because basically, if you've basically harming the actual muscle of your heart from inappropriate stuff and all that, you actually get scarring that actually happens. But the scarring's gone away, and the blood perfusion is, not an issue, So, but I usually use the simple one that I mentioned to. I can't remember who I mentioned it to last time. I say, well, if it's that bad, it doesn't seem to have done multiple generations of Inuits any problem. They are humans as well. It doesn't seem to have caused them any issues. And then people, will start a bit of a conversation with you and be a bit, let's say, potentially more open, because most people don't think about these things. They're sort of in that paradigm, low fat paradigm, brainwashed completely. And so when you throw a spanner in their works, they go, oh, I didn't think of that. And then they basically go, oh, maybe he's got a point on some of these things. And then they're a bit more, they lower the drawbridge. They sort of, reduce the blinkers, and they're a bit more receptive. That's what I find from my own experience, because when you challenge people's ideas with a contradiction, they go, oh, it's the best way, without actually ramming things down people's throat, because that doesn't work. It's basically just pointing out the contradictions, and then they will start asking you questions. Mm-hmm. It's reverse psychology. It's the best way of actually, don't lecture, don't initiate. Let them, they ask you, what do you do? Oh, yeah, I'm doing the carnivore diet. They go, oh, you're crazy, you're going to die and all that. Well, it doesn't seem to have affected, for multiple generations of Inuits. They never had heart disease or any problem. They eat shitloads of meat, so they're humans. So why should it affect me? So you leave it at that, and then they will start asking you questions. Oh, what do you eat? What do you do? They'll start being inquiring about your lifestyle. What are you doing and all that? And so then you can give them little snips, and as they keep on asking questions, you just give them a bit more. It actually works much better that way. They walk away and they go, oh, that was really interesting. I never heard that sort of stuff. That's what they say to me. And they walk away thinking about it, And even if they don't go all the way, they may, may change, remove certain things out of their diet and actually improve their diet and be healthier for it.
Yeah. I wish that I was able to have those conversations with some of my family.
Yeah, look,
I was at my mom's house earlier, and she had a bottle of olive oil mixed with canola oil on her counter. Extra virgin canola and olive oil. And I just couldn't even say anything about it.
Yeah, look, it's hard.
Tried.
And it doesn't work if you do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I can't proselytize it.
No. And trying to do it that way doesn't work. And it's always harder with your family, because with your family, you never have these conversations very easily, because your family, it's like you have a certain relationship with your family. You talk certain things, but you know, I've found the only way basically with my family is when I've done things. It's like I'm my next door neighbour because she remembers me. You know, she's remembered me for more than a decade now, and knows when I was in my 40s, I had more wrinkles than what I have now. And so Ling, you know, she usually says, you know, how, you know, and I'm told her, you know, this is what I eat now and all that. And my sister, who's got more wrinkles, my younger sister than me, you know, after knowing all this sort of stuff, then she goes, you know, vanity can help as well, you know, convince people.
Yeah.
You know, so in family, it's you. My younger sister was more vanity than basically health because she still smokes.
Yeah.
Well, she's cut smoking down recently. You know, she's the one that had asthma that basically, but she actually, since she's moved to Perth, she said she gave up smoking, which is good. So it's a fucking miracle.
Speaking to your vanity point, I think that was the tipping point for Michaela Peterson's story too. That her skin clearing up, or it was what kept her, or saw that she was getting good results, and what drove her to it was ultimately that her skin wasn't clearing up.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. Sometimes it's these sort of things that help people, you know, just push them, you know, over that obstacle, or you know, the thing that holds them back from going to the next level. And so it works. You know, sort of it's less lecturing and sort of getting them to initiate some of the stuff, some of the questioning themselves. Sort of works very much, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of these, you know, the refined oils are the actual oil price. Yes, probably also. Actually, you guys have got plenty of water up there.
We've got a bunch of frozen water falling from the sky right now. It's snowing today. It's snowing now. It's snowing right now. Yeah. Very unseasonable. Frost and chilly weather is common for May, but not snow.
Well, the funny thing is there are 3 parts of the world which have the most like storage of fresh water. It's Russia, Canada, and Brazil.
You hear that, Luke? Here, you and me, we're gonna ration water to everybody else. Let's get on that.
That's it. You guys could be the new oil.
Do we have any Russian viewers?
Water barons of the world. Don't worry, you'll end up the 51st state of the United States. That's the downside. Just letting you know.
Implying that we aren't already.
Yeah, that was a basically, you know, one of those sort of half jokes. Yes.
The door was already open, and Butter managed to make a bunch of noise opening it on her way.
Oh. Yes, you know, it's always she's the one that usually makes the noise, doesn't she? Yeah, Butter is. Yeah, normally the purring, the type of purring. Yep, yeah, I remember that. Hey, leave the cables alone, Butter.
Good lately. I don't know what she's doing. I'll just have to guard my laptop here.
Oops. Damn, did it again. Hadn't been going through the stream fast enough, and what it did was it just threw me out.
Oh yeah, if you're too far behind on the comments there, it only lets you stay so far behind the new ones coming in.
Yeah, it basically so I've lost my spot anyway. So sorry guys, if I ask you a question, just ask again.
Luke says he'll sell deuterium-rich water to his enemies.
That's it. Just tell him it's good for you. It's alkaline. It's alkaline. Yeah.
Well,
you know, when it's got more deuterium, it actually becomes more alkaline. So, you know, Yeah, I know, crazy. And people actually sell that shit for good prices. Kale.
I have a shirt that says kale in the Yale font, but I had to stop wearing it because I don't support that message anymore.
Yes, the kale and green things.
Now it just says "Living the Dream."
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, Zach. That's what I'm doing. Okay, an actual question. Thank God for that. How dangerous are goitrogenics? My mum used to have occasional green juice until I told her to stop. Probably messed up her thyroid. Okay. Yes, they will have a deleterious effect on your thyroid. Even the Japanese, who basically consume a lot of the goitrogens and actually use a lot of seaweed. Problem with seaweed as well is, if you're using too many goitrogens and having effect on your thyroid, and then trying to counterbalance that with enough basically iodine, it doesn't actually naturally always work as well as some people think, because a lot of people think about the pituitary gland involved in TSH and stuff like that, and then the downstream, but they're actually from the hypothalamus. There's another hormonal component that actually affects that. So it's a bit more of a complicated picture. So to sometimes, that's why when you go on a carnivore diet and you eliminate a lot of this sort of stuff, then all these hormones start balancing with the extra cholesterol, start balancing themselves. So the effect of goitrogenic foods, depends on things like your other nutrition as well. So so it can be quite deleterious if your cholesterol levels, your other sort of nutrients like selenium are very low. Things like zinc is very low. So if the status of these other things are very low, that can have also a deleterious effect as well. Your cortisol's high as well, because that can affect through that other nexus that I mentioned about the hypothalamus before. So there's a lot of things that can be at play. So it's not simple in that regard. That's why there are people that basically have quite a bit of meat in their diet. They've got they're eating a whole lot of other nutritions that are keeping their hormones in balance. But they're actually eating some of these foods, and they have very minor effects. So, how dangerous depends on your general nutrition as well. So it's not, but generally speaking, you don't want to have that sort of stuff, and you don't want to then be trying to guess how much iodine do I need, because iodine needs to stay within a sweet spot. Your thyroid function needs to stay in a sweet spot. It can actually go either too high, so basically you can end up with hyperthyroidism, or hypo, and there's that sweet spot means you have to have all your other hormones that are interplaying in balance and the right nutrition. So it's not just the goitrogenic foods. You can still, without goitrogenic foods, on a standard American diet, you can still have hypothyroidism, end up with it. So you don't need goitrogenic foods in that regard. But, they don't help. They can exacerbate a standard diet's effect, and they can definitely, without proper nutrition, they can exacerbate those sort of conditions potentially, in terms of thyroid health. So the effects will be different on different people depending on their nutrition and depending on their state of their hormones and many other factors. So it's much more complicated in that regard, but it's not a good thing. In general terms, high amount of goitrogens are going to be bad for you. They're not going to be very good for your hormonal system in general terms. Do you want to say something, Jared? Or
No, I was just noticing Daniel saying that Bart has just gone live.
Has he? Okay. Yes, we're in the 3 hour sort of mark. we'll keep on going. Whoever wants to stay will stay. You know. Yeah. Well, look, it's even for cows, even for livestock, it doesn't seem to be very good for them. I think I've heard a number of people in agriculture saying that things like kale are not really good for animals either. So it's really probably not that, best regular grass is much better, for, because a lot of these things are just really not fit. I mean, obviously it's not as bad as some of the other goitrogenic foods, kale, but it's still, there are a number of issues and, sort of, they probably shouldn't be giving it to animals. Okay. Let's move to a few more questions. You guys could trade a lot of water. You may be currently, that's because of the China trade collapsing on you. You're not selling commodities to China to the same rate that you were before, and things have really gone pear-shaped. That's the key driver there. But and she was saying my neighbour raises sheep, and down from him I have a goat farmer, cow farmers on the other side. Yep, so it's a bit of a mixed variety of ruminants in the area in that regard.
Certainly better than having agriculture on all sides of you if they're doing any spraying. I assume they're not doing that since they have livestock.
Yeah, so you would have also, that's the other thing that's really good about having an area like that, where you've got a lot of different, producers of livestock and stuff like that, rather than having some of the agriculture where you can get runoff, and also you can get pesticide sort of contamination of the fields. So that's another issue that can actually happen in those sort of areas. So yeah, you guys are probably lucky in that regard that you've got that sort of production. So you used to have dairy. Okay, yeah. Look, like in Australia, dairy farmers are basically being consolidated by big dairy companies, and they're just being squeezed to the bone and out of existence, unfortunately, unless they're basically, sort of people that are selling directly to other people, or people who are basically producing. A lot of small dairy farmers in Australia that couldn't survive milk have actually switched over to supplements like whey and stuff like that, and cheese production. So I know that in the southern part of Tasmania, some of the ex-milk producers have switched over to cheeses and sort of creating their own variety of cheeses, specialty cheeses, and also selling whey, because there's actually a manufacturing company in the southern part of Tasmania that produce a lot of supplements, like the ones, these new bulk nutrition and stuff like that. So they're able to basically access some of these farmers. So there are ways of surviving the big end of town that's squeezing a lot of the smaller farmers by getting into certain specialty stuff. Sometimes, if you've got very small farms that don't have enough economies of scale, people getting into cooperatives, stuff like that, and setting up co-ops with a certain brand for their region is another solution. There are a lot of solutions that people can do. At the end of the day, what people do, that they have to themselves work that out. I haven't actually looked into the futures market in terms of Brazil, so I could if I get a chance, I'll take a look and I'll send you something. But I haven't actually looked at specifically the futures market. I do actually look at the futures market, because futures market usually indicates, and the bond markets usually indicate where things are going, or where the key investors in the world are thinking things are going, and that usually does precipitate certain things. But I'll take a look. the top of my head now. I've been too focused on North America, Europe, and Australasia. Blinkers, because kale is a superfood, and the white people started eating it every day. Is that why we degenerated? Yes. Next time I'll get some kale, I'll get on all fours. Do it the right way.
I don't think I ever managed to enjoy kale.
Nah, it's shit.
I ate it for a while, but I don't think I ever liked it.
I was more spinach, which actually has more oxalate, which isn't really good for you. That caused me a lot of issues. But when it came to kale, Dad grew it 1 year, and he tried it and said, "Oh, this is shit." Never did it again. And he gave me some, and I tried it and go, "Oh, this really doesn't agree with me." Just the taste. I just wasn't really into it. I tried it once, and that was about it. And then I tried it 2 ways, just on its own, like fresh, just raw. Didn't like it. Then I basically tried cooking it, but it seems to get a strange sort of flavor on its own. If you combine it with a couple of other things, it's agreeable to some extent, to a minor extent. But when you cook it, it actually, even though it's, I didn't like the sort of the tactile or the sensation when I'm actually chewing it that I get from other vegetables that I chew. So I didn't really like that texture type thing from the kale. It sort of didn't agree with me. But then the sort of that change and that smell to it when you cook it was actually even worse. So I went, oh God, shit.
I used to wilt it with a bit of apple cider vinegar and coconut oil and garlic powder, pepper, and salt, and it was decent tasting. But so is anything that you put garlic powder, pepper, and salt on. So
yeah, exactly. If you put so many other ingredients that you can hardly taste it,
Yeah.
So yeah, but on its own like that, it is quite a nasty sort of taste in that regard. So
I don't miss it.
Yeah. No, definitely. I tried it once, and that was only once, and that was basically it for me. So it never did anything for me. So Daniel, I came a family of farmers, sheep and cows, 4th generation plus. Good for you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I come from multiple generations of farmers on both sides of the family. So my father and mother were the first to basically not live in a village in their family, So some of the other siblings as well in the modern era, but prior to that, everybody lived in a village. Dad lived in a mountainous area, being a pastoralist, and Mum, traditionally, her family side came from a mountainous area as well. They moved down to the lowlands after the Second World War. And so they sort of lived in lowland sort of areas and pretty much, because Dad was born in a village, Mum was born in a village. They grew up in a village in farming, and in their late 20s, they came to Australia, and that's when they also got married and started having us in much later years of life compared to many other people in that generation. So my parents were very different in that regard, probably because they both came from a very different background. I mean, Mum came from sort of her family relatives are sort of a more landed gentry, and Dad's were sort of his family. They were all. I mean, even at the time, my great grandfather, he was basically educated as well. In that, we're talking about back in the 19th century, which was very rare. But they also had a lot of land which they owned. They may have been landed sort of. They had even a whole mountainous area is sort of like a common title for all of us. So, But, you know, the Second World War, even people that had wealth became impoverished. You know, so they basically left the land, they went elsewhere, you know, so the whole society was put into an upheaval situation, which forced people out. My father ended up, you know, after the military, 3 years in the military, ended up, because he had actually trained as a motor mechanic, and then in the military. So, because basically land in the mountains had lost a lot of people because of the Civil War. Large parts of the actual mountainous areas were depopulated and brought into the lowlands in order to basically reduce the ability for the rebels to get access to people and resources. But as a consequence of that, what happened was that, you know, the land value of those sort of areas dropped dramatically, and the land values in cities or towns increased dramatically. You know, and there was a lot of shanty town type situation around the place, and then it's sort of, you know, things modernized and you don't have that anymore. But that was after that war period. But as a consequence of that, what happened was those people that had a whole lot of land, that land became had less value. And when you lose value and all that, you've got all these kids, you know, you can't really give them something that is of value. You know, they move out, they go elsewhere. That's what my father did. He actually started working as after the military as a boilermaker welder for an American company called Kaiser, and then got into the shipbuilding industry. And I mean, he was earning good money. He was earning you know, sort of middle class wages in a country that was quite impoverished. He was wearing good suits and all that sort of stuff. So there was no reason for him to leave the country, in a sense, because he was, you know, very comfortable in that regard. I mean, he also had gold coins and quite a bit, you know, stashed away. So he was very comfortable in that way. But he'd met my mum, and her brother had actually moved to Australia to basically work for a couple of years to earn some money, and then move back to Greece to start some businesses. So my mouth is drying out from last night. I did 4 hours last night.
I saw that you were on. It was early morning for me, and you had been going for like 2 hours when I got up, and I went to the market and got my groceries, and you were still going when I got home.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of dad you know, had met my mum, and he was actually dating a girl from one of the islands. I can't remember which island, but her brother didn't really like my father. They didn't get on, and he basically you know, forced his sister not to basically, you know, see my father anymore. So he broke up the relationship. It was a much more patriarchal society back in those days, and the family really had a lot of sway over younger women. So basically, then my uncle pressured my father and said, his uncle basically said, you know, look, because his uncle was a good friend of my mother's brother. So that was a sort of connection. And he said, you know, you've met Anastasia, she's a good woman and all that, you know, why don't you go to Australia and, you know, try something new with your life and all that. And that's what he did, you know. So yeah, that's how I ended up coming into existence. Me and my two sisters. Yeah, so it's, you know, so a lot of Greeks left the islands. That's why the majority of the Greeks in Australia, America, tend to be islanders, because they were impoverished. They had nothing going for them after the Second World War. This is before tourism took off or anything like that. So they were just these rocky, abandoned, barren islands. And so they left in mass. So the majority of Greeks that migrated out of Greece were islanders. So my father was one of those rare mainlanders that didn't really need to go, but actually went because of different circumstances. And especially at his age, in his late 20s, having lived, you know, for nearly 30 years in Greece. Born there and lived, and having to, you know, make that. But Dad has always been, he's been adventurous in that regard. It's probably where I get my adventure, where I sort of, since 18 years of age, I've been venturing around Asia and all sorts of places around the world, where I get my adventurism. I think it's, you know, or risk taking, or, you know, or really going crazy on a bicycle or a motorbike or whatever. It's probably where I get it from my father, because he was, I don't think I would exist if he basically was more, you know, let's say, more conservative, less willing to take risks, he would have probably stayed in Greece. He had a good job, well paid and all that. Why go? He was still a good pick, for women, especially in that era when, salaries were much lower for most people. So I think it's his adventurous nature that actually, compelled him to basically say, "Oh, this is boring. I want to try something new." So he ended up here, and the rest is history. In that regard, there you go. You've learned something about my family history. Since people are sharing, let's get back into the nutritional side of things. This thing today is really, I don't know why it's... So, I'm at a crossroad. Most Brazilian 100% grass-fed meat is exported. Really? Which means I must get to know farmers or buy from a rich man private stock.
Yeah, make friends with a farmer. You won't regret it.
Exactly.
It's a good resource to have. Making friends with one farmer tends to lead to being friends with more than one farmer.
You can build up a network of contacts.
That's can lead to some good food security. That's part of the reason that I've been helping out on a farm.
Yeah, look, probably at this point in time in history, it's probably not a bad idea for people to do that, to actually have those connections. I mean, I've got friends that are farmers and all that, and people that I know, and so I can access, as I said, I've got half a lamb in my fridge, and I can access that sort of stuff. Whenever Andrew slaughters any sheep, he usually gives me a call, says, "How much do you want?" So
that's good.
Yeah. So basically, because we're close friends, I usually basically get preferential treatment. Let's put it that way, which is basically good, and that's what you really need, because even though Australia is pretty much secure compared to many other countries, as I've said before to people, Australia produces 3 times the food that we consume. We actually export 2/3 of our produce to the rest of the world. So in that regard, there is possibly less risk but in other parts of the world, it's not the same. There's either because there are a lot of multinational corporations that control the food supply, and the governments don't restrict them, and they can just basically send everything out anywhere they like. But it does vary between parts of Australia as well, I have to be honest. It's not the same. Tasmania is very different than parts of the mainland. I mean, if you go to Melbourne or Sydney, the big cities, you don't have the same level of, you could say, a lot of the good quality foods tend to be out of specialty stores and more expensive. We're in Tasmania, not an issue. I go to my local store, which is just up the road here. I mean, literally, it's a 3.5-minute walk. That's how close. And it's an IGA store, and they basically have all these sort of meats from, Cape Grim which is basically one of the islands of the smaller islands off Tasmania. Well, it's the biggest island off Tasmania, King Island, and and Cape Grim, beef is basically pastured, really high quality stuff, and very yellow, because the grass there is so hardy that it actually produces far more omega-3s in the actual. So it has a very nice taste to the meat. And there's a lot of other meats around the place, which is all just pastured, grass-fed. A lot of chickens that are pastured in Tasmania. So, and it's also very hard for us to export things out of the island because it's so costly. So a lot of it ends up, really good quality stuff ends up being sold domestically or locally within the actual state itself.
Speaking of good quality and yellow for omega-3 content, I had some colostrum this week for the first time. It has a really interesting taste. I had to cut it with milk. It's a little bit strong tasting for me.
That's right.
But that tells me it's good. It tastes kind of like the same flavors that are in cream, but it's a lot richer tasting without being so fatty. It's hard to describe. It's a little bit earthy too.
It's a very potent, yeah.
It's very, very potent, yeah. But cut with milk, it tastes just fine. And I really noticed a difference in how I felt drinking it. Really, really,
Look, yeah,
really
it is
strong stuff.
It's really healthy for you, you know. And I haven't cut it with milk in the past. I've cut it with cream.
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Yeah,
because
that would work
cream,
even better. I just didn't happen to not have cream on hand.
yeah, cream but sort of overwhelms it more than even milk does.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only reason. Yeah, look, it's a much more intense that sort of taste. And sometimes, you know, I've said to other people, you know, if you really want it for health purposes, but you really just can't handle the taste, just cut it with cream. It's the best thing to do. You know, it's which I've found anyway. So give it a try next time you get a chance. Give it a try with cream.
I met somebody fairly recently who said he was taking dehydrated colostrum pills, and that he felt great from them and really felt that they were working, but he noticed that his fingernails were growing faster, and he thought that was making him age faster.
Okay.
He felt that he didn't want to speed up anything in his body, is what he said. That I didn't like that his nails were growing faster, but even though he felt great from it, he stopped taking it for that reason, and I just had to shake my head.
Okay, I haven't heard that one. That's a new one for me.
Me neither. I've always heard that faster nail growth and hair growth can also be healthy, but
well, if your nails and stuff like that are growing, it could be also be if you've got, like, if you're eating more eggs, you end up having more biotin in your diet, so you end up having basically stronger, you know, hair and all that. I mean, my hair, I never, you know, I can comb my hair, you know, like crazy if I want to, but I never have any hairs that drop out or anything like that. No hair loss whatsoever. Even in the bath when I'm actually, you know, there's, you know, nothing there. And it's pretty much because I put it down to my zinc and biotin consumption, you know. And biotin plays a big role for healthy hair and nails and stuff like that. And a lot of people don't realize they just, you know, because they, you know, even in the carnivore community where they're consuming a lot of just muscle meat, and they don't eat eggs, and they don't eat a number of other foods that are higher in the sort of in these sort of things, you know, no organ meats. So, you know, muscle meat, you know, if you don't, you have to really eat a horrendous amount. Not everybody can, because they're not big enough size, and you don't get enough biotin. So, and people don't eat organ meats, a lot of them, and they just eat muscle meats. And so they end up having a more thinness of the hair or loss of hair or stuff like that. So I think, look, I don't know the diet of a person. I've never heard of you know, anything like that, whether it's colostrum or any other thing that to have that effect on nails.
No, I don't know. He doesn't seem like he's.
I mean, I haven't seen that effect. I haven't seen that effect on myself, and I suspect when you haven't had that effect either.
I'm wondering if maybe his nails were growing abnormally slowly before, and maybe the colostrum just sort of brought it up to a normal rate, and he didn't like it.
Maybe.
Yeah, in any case, it seems like a silly reason to give up feeling good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look, I don't know. You know, it's weird. I mean, well, yeah, you're probably right. You may be right. You know, if somebody's basically had years and years where they've had poor nutrition, had very difficulty growing nails, they've grown very slowly, and then all of a sudden they get really good nutrition and they start growing at a normal rate, yeah, could basically be, you know, what the fuck's happening, you know? Because remember, a lot of people, you know, until they basically move away from a vegetarian, vegan, or SAD diet, they don't know how good it is until they've actually moved away from it. And sometimes, you know, certain effects like the nails or whatever that happen, or, you know, a lot more, like your hair grows and you fucking have to cut it too often, like what happens to me. And if I up my
fast.
If I up my hair, I up my hair. If I up my eggs and my zinc levels in my diet, my hair becomes really sort of much more thicker and really firm. And even my, the lady that actually cuts my hair, she goes, bloody hell, this is Vin. She goes, bloody hell, your hair's really, it's really hard to cut through. It's really thickened up quite a bit since last time. I go, yeah, I said, it's probably the overconsumption of eggs and meat that I've been doing recently, but that's what happens in that regard. But I don't think it's just pure muscle meat that does it, because when I do only muscle meat, I remember there was a period when I was doing keto, and I dropped a lot of things like dairy, eggs, and a lot of other things, and I just did some muscle meat for a period of time. My hair started thinning out a bit. So I think that, there's not enough nutrition in muscle meat alone. That's my sort of my view, and I think you do need to have a much richer sort of diet. I mean, you could probably do, if you're very fat, as I've said to people, if you're really overweight and stuff like that, and you've got a lot of stored nutrients in your body, because, all the fat soluble vitamins, certain minerals and certain other things that are stored in the body, as you're losing that rapid weight loss, like the guy in Britain who did the 380 day of fasting, and, he just lost all this. Because remember, you're losing all this tissue is being recycled. So you've got all this protein, you've got all these fat-soluble vitamins that are coming out of your adipose tissue, out of your fat cells, and all this sort of stuff. So you've got a lot of material there, If you basically are losing rapidly weight loss and you take supplements of, let's say, retinol, or take supplements of something like, D3, well, you've got some stored stuff in there. You're going to be releasing that into your bloodstream, so you'll end up having too much. Your levels of vitamin D, vitamin A, retinol will actually go quite high as a consequence. So it's really important that you realize that if you've got rapid weight loss, you're going to have a lot of fat-soluble vitamins being released. So you need to balance that thing. And you need to actually, I usually say to people, if you're doing rapid weight loss, you're going to be releasing that. You're not going to have as much MK4. Add MK4 to regulate those other two much better. So I don't believe in supplements forever, but as a short-term measure, to balance those and regulate those properly, in that regard, and sort of all those minerals that get pushed out and stuff like that and get circulated, you want them to go to the right place. You need more MK4 to regulate that sort of thing. Vitamin D3 and retinol will basically, provide the sort of material to cause the transcription of these enzymes, these proteins, but you need something to activate them to work properly and regulate them, which is MK4. So that's the only supplement that I would throw in rapid weight loss, nothing else. Or basically just say, well, I'm not going to have a supplement, I'll just have brie, which is very high in MK4. So you just consume brie. It's very low in carbohydrate. It's 0.5 grams, half a gram for every 100 or 3.5 ounces. So basically, even if you have, let's say, an entire big 200 gram, we're talking about 7 ounces of brie, which is quite a bit of cheese, for one day, you're only going to get a gram of carbohydrate.
I wish I could get raw brie.
Me too. I do sometimes get. So some of the IGA store up here sometimes brings French raw brie, but they don't have it all the time, and it just fucking frustrates me. The only one that they have at the moment that I can actually get is a brie that actually has got, the blue, what is it called? Where they've put that blue type, the bacteria, the blue type cheese type thing that they've got into it, which they've combined the brie with that. And that is fucking pricey. I did buy some. I bought a small bit of that, just a small bit. It cost me $15.
I would pay a good amount for raw brie because I wouldn't eat it all that often. I just wish I could get it. We actually have sort of a surplus of milk now, which is nice. So we're thinking about making our own cheeses, but probably only going to be aging for a month or two tops. But yeah, just pasteurized cheese and pasteurized dairy it inflames me so much. It's not worth it, even if it does have a little bit of extra vitamin content or fat soluble vitamin content there that I could use. It's doesn't make me feel good.
I can't believe with Quebec being so close, and they would have a lot of imports of French products.
I have heard of people having success getting some better raw cheese products directly from farms in Quebec.
Okay.
And I do border on Quebec right now, but with the state of the world,
the isolation,
the interprovincial travel is super restricted, and anybody who leaves New Brunswick is obligated to self-isolate for 14 days when they return, even if you just do like a beer run over the border.
Okay. Shit.
And they've actually gone so far as to specify that anybody self-isolating when returning to the province must even self-isolate from other members of the household. So ideally, they just stay in a room alone for 14 days.
And they squeeze things under the door.
I don't know. It's it's going to absolutely ludicrous levels.
Yeah, it is. It is sort of crazy stuff. Well, you probably have to wait until the end of the year when things ease up. As you move into summer, sort of the things. And that's the other thing is some of the new. I actually looked at a study. I've got on my bloody work machine. I should have actually put it across here. It's a study out of Sweden, and they were looking at basically people that have been affected by the virus, the outcomes, and the people that had the worst outcomes were Somali Swedes. They only constitute 0.62% of the population, so less than nearly just a bit over 0.5%, and they have 40% the death rates compared to the general population. Now, the people in Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, they tend to use a lot of supplements. They're more health conscious, these people.
Right.
And they tend to basically supplement vitamin D in the winter.
Yes, I've heard of Sweden installing full spectrum light fixtures in their bus stops and such to help with SAD.
Exactly.
So they're obviously a little bit more aware of the lack of sun.
Precisely. But the problem is with people like Somalis and people like that, because of their religion also, they cover. So they don't get the benefit of that by covering a lot of their skin and stuff like that. They don't go out in public with, hands sort of exposed and stuff like that. And as a consequence, they have some of the lowest vitamin D status. And a lot of the people in northern Italy as well, because it's a bit mountainous in northern Italy. It's like people don't know the elevation it is, and those sort of regions tend to be at a higher elevation, further away from the coast, and they tend to be more vulnerable also to these sort of deficiencies. And because people don't, in those sort of parts of the world, they don't supplement. They just don't. It's not a tradition to supplement. They're more in their old traditional ways set.
There was a really good here. I'm not sure on the source of this data. I just put it in the private chat there. There was a good link there that just highlighted the severity of outcomes linked or correlated with vitamin D intake. Now, obviously, it's epidemiology, but epidemiology is, in fact, useful for identifying interesting trends for further examination, and this is certainly one of those.
And remember, it's mostly when it comes to epidemiology, there are fundamental differences between. Yep, I've seen this one actually. The sort of differences, and the effects because of vitamin D levels. A lot of people don't realize that vitamin D status is a very important marker. And that's why from the beginning, when I did my first videos and all that, I sort of, the three things that I basically put out there was the zinc, the chewable zinc, the vitamin D, 4,000 IUs, and basically the other component was, because remember, vitamin D it's required basically to regulate the macrophage to prevent the cytokine storm. So it plays an important role. If your status is very low, your T cells and your killer cells, are coated with vitamin D receptors. So if they can't go out there and challenge the disease in the early stages, the disease becomes more pronounced in the system. So that's the whole thing. slow down the disease, kill it off as much as possible so it slows down. Use the zinc and the ionophore to get the zinc into the cell, to suppress replication, to keep the viral load down. And if you can keep the viral load down, you give the immune system enough time to build antibodies and fight it off. That's the whole threat. These things do not prevent the disease. What they do is they reduce the severity, and you give the body enough time to basically respond. And that was my strategy of how to go about that. And it's simple. It's a simple strategy. And all the science that's coming out now is actually bearing that out. If you just do the ionophore, the quinins and stuff like that, they don't work on their own. But if you combine all three of these elements, they do work. Because you're regulating and keeping down the cytokine storm with the vitamin D, plus you're basically supporting that immune response, and it's not overly exaggerated immune response, which is important. And so all these sort of things are interplaying, which are very important in that regard. So, back to the comments.
I think I've got about another 5 or 10 minutes in me.
Yep.
I need to get a small meal. I haven't
fair enough
this evening.
Yeah, it's it can be a bit like that. I haven't had a meal yet. It's nearly 2:00 and I'm PM. I haven't had a meal from yesterday. So usually
I've been doing a little bit more intermittent fasting again, and I was off of it for a while.
I just do time restricted feeding, but within the circadian time. So through the week, I will have my first meal or first drink or whatever. I may have a glass of milk, or I may have a coffee or whatever. The first thing will break my fast will be at 11 o'clock. And then 6 hours later, which is 5 o'clock, will be my last meal, whatever it is. So it's within the 6 hours. Because now it's in winter, the sun's sort of going down. So I keep it to 6 hours. In summer, I take it to 8 hours.
Luke's just posted another.
We will have to look at that,
especially since he's on his way to bed. We must look at it for him before he goes.
Yes.
Well done, Luke. Nihilistic ideations. Unstable mood. It helps that I'm wearing the same hoodie.
That's true. Comparisons.
You should have added another point on the smuggled raw milk that just says hat. I don't think I've shaved since that week, actually. It's been 4 or 5 weeks since I should probably take it down.
Yeah, it looks a bit rough. Yeah, clean your act up, mate.
Hey, now, the last time that you told me that I didn't look dressed for the part, I wore a blazer. I'll be in a tuxedo next.
That's it.
Be putting you to shame. You'll be in your t-shirt and no pants as you were for Bart's stream.
Oh, look, exactly. Anyway, we're pretty much at the end there. Yeah, get extra sun. Yeah, that's right. So that is basically it. What we need to do is get out there and sort of. Well, Kitty likes your beard.
Oh, thank you. I get a pass for having a beard. I don't know if you can sort of call it a beard. It's a little bit little bit patchy, a little bit thin on the sides. That's all I got.
That's it. It's a bit shabby, you know. But I mean, it's. But from what I noticed is your cheekbones. If you look at your cheekbones on this one, your cheekbones are more pronounced, like myself. Your cheekbones
On which one?
on your other one compared to your first one.
I guess I'm smiling a little bit on the right hand side too.
Probably as well.
Yeah,
But
and I'm
good nutrition. Um, you know, really helps in that regard. But
yeah.
I'm probably making it up. I am making it up. How old is the other one?
Looks like it's probably 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay. Oh, that's not much. God. Must be the beard. And also that you're closer on one of the photos than the other. It's
Yeah, and I
probably
rearranged the room. The lighting's different. There's sockeye.
yeah.
Luke, this is very inconsistent. I
Yeah,
don't accept this
exactly.
comparison. You must redo it before you go to bed.
Precisely. We'll do one of those. Remember, whenever you the vegan deterioration does those the before and after and all that, and you get all these comments from the vegans going, "No, it's that, it's this, it's the lighting, it's this," really being very critical.
Yeah.
You're starting to sound like a vegan, mate.
I better go have another glass of milk before I
Yeah,
get
you
all the way
better.
there.
You better. You need to knock that thing out of your system.
Nip it in the bud.
That's it.
It's pernicious. Take care of it sooner
It
than
is.
later.
Exactly. Anyway, God, no more questions. Everybody's dried up. I think everybody's giggling and laughing. They're on the ground, literally. So
I think Bart's poached our viewers.
I think he has. I think he
I think
has. That's
it was
why.
slowly trickling down ever since he went
Yes,
live.
they are. So
The one's traitorous, really fickle
that's
crowd.
it.
What can I say?
Yes. So we'll drop it here. Bart
Sure.
has. Yep. He has. So we'll drop it here. Great having you here, mate. Appreciate it. Thanks for turning up.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always appreciate your company and some of the banter we get onto.
Yeah, of course. I'm still endeavoring to make it for the start of one of your streams. It just hasn't worked out for the timing of my Saturday yet.
That's okay. Doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you're on for part of it, and we always have good fun in that regard.
Indeed.
And my regards to Butter. She's close by there.
Yep, she's right behind
Or
the
hiding.
laptop. If I had an external webcam, I would turn it and show you, but
okay, doesn't. Next time you can grab her. Anyway, see you, mate. Take care, and we will chat next week.
Until next week.
Yep. See ya. Anyway, guys, it's that part of the day. I think I'm pull the plug as well. So we will chat next week and get into all sorts of other things. Take care. Have a nice weekend, and keep your distance from the kale. See you, Lucas. Anyway, bye, guys. Yips.